There are places in the Pacific Northwest where the forest forgets how to make sound. The Gifford-Pinchot National Forest sprawls across 500,000 acres of southwestern Washington, a landscape of volcanic soil and old-growth Douglas fir that has remained largely unchanged since the last ice age. Named after the first chief of the United States Forest Service, it's a place of deep geological history. Shaped by the eruptions of Mount St. Helens, carved by ancient glaciers, and threaded with hundreds of miles of trails that see fewer than a dozen hikers per year. Most of the forest is accessible. Most of it follows the rules of the natural world. But there is a section beginning roughly 3 miles east of the abandoned Mosquito Lakes trailhead and extending northeast toward the Dark Divide, where something fundamental seems to have changed. The area has no official name. On topographic maps issued before 1990, it appears as ordinary terrain, contour lines, elevation markers, Forest Service roads. After 1990, the maps show less detail, fewer trails, no infrastructure, and in the corner of certain editions, a notation in small print, "Survey incomplete." The first documented incident occurred in July of 1983. A team of 5 geologists from the University of Washington entered the area to conduct a mineral survey. Their objective was routine: collect soil samples, map fault lines, document any unusual magnetic readings common to volcanic regions. They carried standard field equipment, compasses, altimeters, radio transceivers, and handheld magnetometers. The team expected to be in the field for 8 days. They returned after 3. No official report was ever filed. The lead geologist, a man named Dr. Raymond Poole, resigned from the university 4 months later and moved to New Mexico. His field journal, obtained years later through a Freedom of Information Act request related to a separate geological study, contained entries for only the first 2 days. The final entry, dated July 16, 1983, read, "Compasses no longer reliable. Magnetics irregular, but not localized. Attempted return via creek bed. No sound from water, no sound from boots. Packing out tonight." The journal contained no further notes. The remaining 60 pages were blank. Over the following decade, reports began to accumulate, not in any centralized database, but in ranger station logbooks, letters to the Forest Service, and scattered mentions in hiking journals. The accounts shared common elements. Hikers entering the area from the southeastern approach reported that their compasses would begin to drift around mile marker 7, not spinning wildly, but drifting in slow, lazy circles, as though true north had become negotiable. Some reported their watches stopping. Others noticed that the forest had gone quiet, not the stillness of a predator nearby, but a total absence of ambient noise. No birds, no insects. No wind moving through the canopy. A forest ranger named Michael Rousseau, stationed at the Pine Creek Information Center from 1987 to 1992, kept informal notes on the phenomenon. In a letter to a colleague, later archived in a regional forestry collection at Washington State University, he described his own experience. "I've been in these woods for 15 years, and I know what quiet sounds like. This isn't that. You can still hear yourself, your breath, your footsteps, but it's like the sound stops 6 feet from your body. A tree could fall 50 yards away, and you wouldn't hear it. I went in once with a whistle, the kind we use for emergencies. Blew it as hard as I could. Heard it in my own ears, sure, but my partner, standing 20 feet in front of me, heard nothing. We tried it again. Reversed positions. Same thing. Sound doesn't carry, or it carries different." Rousseau also noted the time element. According to his records, the silence was not constant. It occurred only during a specific window, between dawn and roughly 9 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time. After 9, the forest returned to normal. Birds resumed singing. Compasses stabilized. The pressure that many described feeling in their ears and chest would dissipate. He wrote, "People don't like to talk about the pressure, but if you ask them directly, they'll tell you. It feels like someone standing behind you. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that you know they're there. You turn around and there's nothing. But the feeling doesn't leave. Rousseau retired early. He declined to be interviewed for this account. In 1991, the United States Geological Survey dispatched a team to investigate reports of magnetic anomalies in the region, part of a broader effort to map geomagnetic variations across the Cascade Range. The team spent 4 days in the field and produced a preliminary report. That report, partially declassified in 2006, noted isolated magnetic inconsistencies not consistent with known volcanic or tectonic activity. It recommended further study. No follow-up study was ever conducted. A section of the report, still redacted, includes a handwritten note in the margin. Equipment malfunction on day 3. Recalibration unsuccessful. Audio recording devices non-responsive within grid boundary. The term grid boundary appeared nowhere else in the document. No map was attached. When asked to clarify in a written request filed in 2009, the USGS responded that no personnel from the original team were available for comment and that the data collected had been lost due to server migration. By the mid-90s, the area had developed a reputation among a small community of backpackers and amateur researchers. Online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena began cataloging experiences. A hiker named Patricia Villalobos posted in 1997 about spending a night in the area. She described waking before dawn to find her tent surrounded by boot prints. Dozens of them, all facing inward toward the tent, pressed deep into the soft soil. She was alone. She had heard nothing during the night. Another account, posted by a man named Joseph Tan in 2001, described his dog, a German shepherd trained for search and rescue, refusing to enter a specific section of trail. The dog, normally obedient and unflappable, sat down, laid flat, and whined. When Tan attempted to coax the animal forward, it urinated and backed away. Tan wrote, "I've seen this dog go into collapsed buildings, into flooded basements, into places no sane animal would go, but it wouldn't take another step. I looked ahead at the trail. It was empty, just trees. But my dog looked at it like something was standing there." In 2003, the Forest Service quietly rerouted the Boundary Trail, moving a popular 12-mile segment 3 miles west of its original path. The official reason cited was erosion and trail degradation. But the rerouted trail added significant elevation gain and bypassed several scenic viewpoints, decisions that frustrated local hiking groups. A public comment period was held. The Forest Service provided no additional explanation. When asked in a written statement why the original trail could not be repaired, a spokesperson replied, "The decision was made in consultation with environmental and safety assessments. The affected area is not suitable for high-traffic recreational use." What assessments? No documents were made public. No safety incidents had been reported on that section of trail in over a decade. A researcher named Dr. Evelyn Carr, a physicist specializing in atmospheric acoustics, visited the area in 2007 as part of an independent study on sound propagation in forested environments. She brought calibrated recording equipment, decibel meters, and controlled sound sources. Her published findings were inconclusive, but noted localized acoustic dampening inconsistent with known environmental factors such as humidity, temperature inversion, or terrain. She wrote in her conclusion, "The observed effect suggests a boundary layer of unknown composition or origin. Further study would require funding and institutional support not currently available." Dr. Carr did not return to the site. In a follow-up email exchange, she stated, "I have no interest in going back. I can't explain what I recorded, or more accurately, what I didn't record. But I can tell you that standing in that part of the forest feels wrong in a way that has nothing to do with science. The silence remains. Hikers still report it. The compasses still drift, and every few years someone posts a new account online, always describing the same window of time, the same pressure, the same feeling of being observed by something that cannot be seen. In 2018, a group of 3 experienced backpackers entered the area during the early morning hours, deliberately seeking to document the phenomenon. They carried GPS devices, cameras, and audio recorders. 2 of them kept detailed journals. All 3 reported the same experience. At approximately 6:45 in the morning, the forest went silent. Their GPS units showed their location accurately, but began displaying erratic elevation data, numbers that fluctuated by hundreds of feet despite the flat terrain. One hiker, a woman named Sarah Lindgren, later wrote, "We could see each other, we could see the trail, but when I called out to the person in front of me, I couldn't hear my own voice past my lips. I saw her turn around, saw her mouth moving, but heard nothing. We left within 20 minutes. We didn't discuss it until we were back at the car. None of us wanted to say it out loud while we were still in there." The Forest Service has issued no warnings. The area remains open to the public. On current maps, it is marked like any other section of wilderness, contour lines, green shading, trail designations. But the trails are empty now, and every morning between dawn and 9, the forest holds its breath. Some forests grow back faster than they should. The Olympic National Forest covers nearly 630,000 acres of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, a region of temperate rainforest and alpine meadows that has sustained commercial logging operations since the late 1800s. The terrain is steep and densely forested, dominated by Douglas fir, western hemlock, and Sitka spruce, trees that can live for centuries and grow to heights exceeding 200 feet. Logging roads carved into the mountainsides in the 1940s and 50s opened access to old-growth stands that had never been touched by industrial equipment. It was profitable work. The trees were massive, the wood high quality, and the demand constant. In Jefferson County, along the eastern slope of the Buckhorn Wilderness boundary, there is a stand of ponderosa pine that should not exist in its current form. The area, known locally as Dalby Flats, spans roughly 200 acres of relatively level ground, a rarity in a region defined by steep gradients and narrow valleys. The forest here is dense and uniform, the trees mature and closely spaced, their canopy forming an unbroken ceiling of green. It looks like every other unlogged section of the Olympic forest, except that it was logged. Twice. The records are clear. In May of 1952, the Peninsula Timber Company received a contract from the United States Forest Service to harvest timber from Dalby Flats. The operation was supervised by a forester named Harold Mackey, a veteran of the Civilian Conservation Corps who had worked in the region since the 1930s. The logging crew consisted of 14 men, operating 2 skidders, 1 yarder, and a fleet of transport trucks. Over the course of 6 weeks, they removed approximately 800,000 board feet of timber, enough to build several hundred homes. The harvest was documented. Photographs from the Peninsula Timber Company archive, now housed at the Jefferson County Historical Society, show clear-cut land, stumps, and slash piles. The images are dated June 1952. The operation was considered routine. Mackey filed his report. The crew moved on. 2 years later, in April of 1954, the same company received another contract for Dalby Flats. The same acreage, the same stand designation. The foreman for the 1954 operation, a man named Vincent Harlow, noted the redundancy in his initial paperwork and contacted the Forest Service office in Olympia. He was told to proceed. The contract was valid. Harlow's crew returned to Dalby Flats and found mature timber, not regrowth, mature trees, indistinguishable from the ones logged 2 years prior. In a written statement submitted to the company in May of 1954, Harlow described the site as fully stocked with merchantable timber average diameter 32 inches, consistent with pre-harvest surveys from 1952. The crew logged it again. Another 800,000 board feet. Another 6 weeks. More photographs, nearly identical to the first set, except for the date stamps. When questioned, the Peninsula Timber Company's chief accountant, a woman named Elaine Kowalski, suggested the error was clerical: duplicate filings, mislabeled contracts, a confusion of site designations. She provided no documentation to support the explanation. The Forest Service accepted it. The matter was closed, but the photographs do not lie. And there is a third set. Aerial surveys conducted by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources in August of 1953, between the two logging operations, showed Dalby Flats as an unbroken expanse of mature forest. No stumps, no slash, no logging roads. The images were part of a routine forestry assessment and were not flagged as unusual at the time. They were filed, archived, and forgotten. Until 2009. A researcher named Dr. Angela Pryor, a historian specializing in mid-century land use policy, was reviewing timber contracts for a book on post-war forestry practices in the Pacific Northwest. She noticed the duplication in the Peninsula Timber Company records and requested the aerial surveys from the State Archive. When the images arrived, she spent 3 days comparing them to the logging photographs. She later wrote, in an unpublished manuscript, "The aerial survey was taken 14 months after the first harvest. There should have been evidence of disturbance, bare soil, early succession growth, visible infrastructure. Instead, the site appeared untouched. I checked the coordinates 5 times. I cross-referenced topographic maps. It was the same location, but the forest had returned, or it had never left." Dr. Pryor reached out to surviving members of the logging crews. Most were deceased. She located 2 men who had worked the 1954 operation. One, a retired equipment operator named Gerald Matsuda, agreed to speak with her over the phone. He said, "I remember Dalby Flats. I remember it because Harlow made a big deal about us being sent back to a site we'd already done. But when we got there, it didn't look like we'd been there before. The trees were old, big. You could tell by the bark, the root structure. Those weren't new trees. Harlow thought maybe we'd been sent to the wrong spot, but the maps matched. The road matched. Even the creek was where it was supposed to be. We just figured the office screwed up the paperwork. Nobody wanted to ask too many questions. You got paid either way." Matsuda paused during the interview, then added, "There was one thing, though. When we started cutting, the wood smelled wrong. Not rotten, not diseased. Just wrong. Like it had been wet for a long time and then dried out too fast. Some of the guys wouldn't touch it with bare hands. Said it made their skin itch. I didn't notice much myself, but I wasn't the one running the saws." Dr. Pryor also attempted to locate Harold Mackey, the forester who supervised the 1952 operation. Mackey had kept detailed field journals throughout his career, small leather-bound notebooks in which he recorded weather conditions, tree counts, equipment notes, and crew observations. The journals were donated to the University of Washington's Forestry Archive after his death in 1991. Pryor reviewed 30 years of Mackey's journals. Every year was meticulously documented, every logging operation detailed, except 1952. The journal for that year contained 240 blank pages. No dates, no entries, just emptiness. In the front cover, written in pencil in what appeared to be Mackey's handwriting, was a single sentence: "I will not document what I cannot explain." The Forest Service was contacted in 2010 regarding the discrepancy. A spokesperson provided a written statement. Historical records from mid-century operations are often incomplete or contain clerical errors due to the limitations of record-keeping technology at the time. The duplication cited in the Peninsula Timber Company contracts is consistent with administrative redundancy and does not indicate any operational irregularity. When asked to explain the aerial surveys showing mature forest between the two logging dates, the spokesperson replied, "Without access to the original survey metadata, we cannot verify the accuracy of the image dates or coordinates. Mislabeling of archival materials is not uncommon." No further comment was provided. Dr. Pryor visited Dalby Flats in person in June of 2011. She brought a handheld GPS unit, a camera, and a copy of the 1953 aerial survey. She hiked in alone, following an old logging road that still appeared on topographic maps but had been decommissioned decades prior. The road was overgrown but passable. She reached the site and found forest. Mature ponderosa pine, dense and uniform, exactly as it appeared in the aerial surveys and exactly as it appeared in the logging photographs. She took core samples from 3 trees using a handheld increment borer. The samples showed growth rings consistent with trees approximately 120 years old. No evidence of disturbance, no evidence of recent growth spurts or environmental stress. She wrote in her field notes, "The trees are old, they have always been old, but they were cut down. There are photographs, there are receipts, there are men who remember doing it, and yet the trees are here." Dr. Pryor submitted her findings to the Journal of Forest History in 2012. The article was rejected. The editor's response cited insufficient corroborative evidence and reliance on anecdotal testimony. She submitted to 3 other journals, all declined. Her manuscript remains unpublished. She left academia in 2014 and now works as a consultant for a private land management firm. She declined to be interviewed for this account. The forest at Dalby Flats is still standing. It is open to the public, though few people visit. There are no trails, no signage, no official access points. The old logging road is barely visible now, reclaimed by ferns and salal. But the trees remain, tall and silent and impossibly old. And somewhere in an archive in Olympia, there are 2 sets of photographs, both showing the same land, both showing stumps and empty ground, taken 2 years apart. And between them, an aerial image of a forest that should not have been there. There are sections of trail where the air itself feels like it's waiting. The Cascade Pass Trail in North Cascades National Park is one of the most popular hiking routes in Washington state, a 9-mile round trip that climbs through old-growth forest before emerging into alpine meadows with views of glaciated peaks. The trail was established in the early 1900s as a mining route, connecting settlements on either side of the Cascade Range. It has been maintained by the National Park Service since the park's creation in 1968. Each year, thousands of hikers walk its length. Most experience nothing unusual. Most never reach mile marker 8 between the hours of midnight and dawn. The trail gains 2,300 feet in elevation over 4.5 miles, switchbacking through stands of mountain hemlock and subalpine fir before breaking tree line. The landscape is defined by steep granite walls, hanging valleys, and the distant rumble of glacial melt. Weather changes rapidly here. Storms roll in without warning. Fog can reduce visibility to 10 feet within minutes. It is the kind of place where hikers are advised to start early, carry extra layers, and never travel alone. Mile marker 8 sits at approximately 4,000 feet elevation, just below the transition from dense forest to open meadow. The trail at this point is wide and well-maintained, carved into the mountainside with a slight grade. To the east, the slope drops away sharply into a creek drainage. To the west, the forest presses close. There is nothing visually distinct about the location. No geological features, no historical markers. Just trail, trees, and stone. The first documented incident occurred in August of 1994. A group of 4 backpackers, 2 couples from Seattle, were descending the trail after watching the Perseid meteor shower from the pass. They had started their descent around 2 in the morning, using headlamps to navigate the switchbacks. At approximately 3:30, they reached mile marker 8. One of the hikers, a man named Trevor Vasquez, later described the experience in a written statement submitted to the park's Visitor Services Office. The temperature dropped like someone had opened a freezer door. I'm talking instant. 1 second I'm sweating under my pack, the next I can see my breath. We all stopped because we thought maybe we'd walked into a cold air sink or something. But it didn't make sense. The cold was localized, maybe 10 feet across the trail. You could step in and out of it. My girlfriend thought her headlamp was dying because the light looked dimmer inside the cold spot. Then my watch stopped. All 4 hikers reported the same phenomenon. Their watches, 3 digital, 1 analog, stopped simultaneously at 3:47. The cold persisted for approximately 2 minutes, then dissipated as suddenly as it had appeared. The watches did not resume. When the group reached the trailhead, the parking lot thermometer read 58 degrees Fahrenheit. At mile marker 8, Vasquez estimated the temperature inside the cold zone had been near freezing. The park received the report and filed it under Environmental Anomaly, Non-Critical. No follow-up investigation was conducted. In September of 1995, a solo hiker named Dr. Miriam Okafor, a biology professor at Western Washington University, was camping near the pass and descended the trail early one morning to retrieve supplies from her car. She reached mile marker 8 at approximately 3:45. In an email sent to the park superintendent 2 days later, she wrote, "I have a background in field biology. I understand temperature inversion, microclimates, and localized weather phenomena. What I experienced does not fit any known pattern. The cold was not gradual. It had boundaries, sharp ones. I could hold my hand out and feel warm air on one side, freezing air on the other. No wind, no precipitation, just cold, and a pressure in my chest like I was at 12,000 feet instead of 4. My altimeter watch stopped. I have no explanation." Dr. Okafor also noted the date, September 17, 1995, a full moon. The third incident occurred in October of 1997. A group of 6 hikers from a mountaineering club in Bellingham were conducting a night navigation training exercise on the trail. They reached mile marker 8 at 3:32 in the morning. The group leader, a wilderness guide named Kevin Dumont, carried a handheld GPS unit and a digital thermometer for recording environmental data. Dumont's log, later shared with a journalist investigating unusual park phenomena, recorded the following: 3:32, temp 62 degrees, clear sky, no wind. 3:45, temp 19 degrees, all GPS readings lost, 3 watches stopped, immediate retreat initiated. 3:50, temp 61 degrees, GPS signal restored, watches remain non-functional. The date was October 17, 1997. Another full moon. Dumont submitted a formal report to the park. He requested an explanation. The response, dated November 4, 1997, stated, "Park staff have reviewed your report and found no evidence of hazardous conditions on the Cascade Pass Trail. Temperature fluctuations in alpine environments are common, particularly during nighttime hours. Electronic devices may malfunction due to battery performance in cold weather. We appreciate your concern and encourage all visitors to remain prepared for variable conditions." The response did not address the pattern. It did not acknowledge the previous reports. And it did not explain why, 3 months later, the Park Service rerouted a section of the Cascade Pass Trail. In March of 1998, construction crews began work on a new trail segment bypassing the original route between mile markers 7 and 9. The official reason given was erosion control and sustainable trail design. The new route added a quarter-mile to the total distance and included significantly more elevation gain. Hikers complained the decision seemed arbitrary. The old trail had been in good condition. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2004 by a researcher named Marcus Lebedev sought all documents related to the trail reroute. The Park Service provided 16 pages. Most were budget approvals and contractor bids. One internal memo, dated January 1998, included a handwritten note in the margin. Recommend immediate closure of original trail segment pending further environmental assessment. Advise against public disclosure of rationale. No environmental assessment was ever released. The old trail section was decommissioned. Signage was removed. Within 2 years, brush and undergrowth had reclaimed the path. But the phenomenon did not stop. In 2003, a park ranger named Sandra Ibarra was conducting a routine wildlife survey in the area and decided to hike the abandoned trail section out of curiosity. She reached the former mile marker 8 at dawn. In her personal journal, obtained years later through an interview, she wrote, "I've worked in these mountains for 8 years. I know cold. This was different. It came from below, not above, like the ground was exhaling. I checked my thermometer, 23 degrees. My truck, parked a mile downhill, read 56. I left. I don't care what the maps say. That section of trail should stay closed." Ibarra also noted the date, June 17, 2003. Lebedev, the researcher who had filed the FOIA request, began compiling reports. He reached out to the hikers from the original incidents. Vasquez confirmed his account. Dr. Okafor provided additional details, including photographs she had taken that morning, images showing frost on vegetation in one frame, dry ground 10 feet away in the next. Dumont shared his full field notes and confirmed the pattern. Every incident occurred on the 17th of a month with a full moon. Lebedev calculated the dates. Over a 15-year period, there were 11 instances where a full moon fell on the 17th of any month. He cross-referenced these dates with park incident reports, missing persons cases, and search and rescue logs. 5 of the 11 dates corresponded with reports of equipment malfunction or unusual weather filed by hikers on the Cascade Pass Trail. None of the reports mentioned the cold. None mentioned stopped watches. But all occurred at or near mile marker 8. Lebedev attempted to visit the site himself in April of 2007. The 17th fell on a full moon. He hiked in with thermal imaging equipment, a seismometer, and 3 synchronized watches. He reached the old trail section at 3:15 in the morning and waited. At 3:47, his equipment registered a desiomol. Temperature dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal camera showed a circular zone, approximately 12 feet in diameter, centered on the trail. The seismometer detected no ground movement. All 3 watches stopped. The phenomenon lasted 90 seconds. Lebedev attempted to publish his findings in the Journal of Environmental Anomalies. The paper was rejected for lack of peer review. He submitted to 4 other journals. All declined. In 2009, he posted his full report online. It received minimal attention. The Park Service was contacted in 2012 regarding Lebedev's findings and the pattern of incidents. A spokesperson provided the following statement. The National Park Service maintains trails based on environmental impact assessments, visitor safety data, and resource management priorities. The rerouting of the Cascade Pass Trail in 1998 was conducted in accordance with standard procedures. We have no record of systematic environmental anomalies at the location in question. When asked specifically about the temperature readings and the pattern of incidents occurring on full moons, the spokesperson replied, "We do not speculate on anecdotal reports." The old section of trail is no longer accessible. The forest has taken it back. But on a clear night, when the moon is full and the date is the 17th, some hikers still report a coldness that seems to rise from the ground itself. And somewhere in a file cabinet in a Park Service office, there are reports, stamped, dated, and quietly forgotten, describing a place where watches stop, temperatures fall, and the mountain holds its breath. Always at 3:47 in the morning, always at mile marker 8. Some places refuse to be buried. Mount St. Helens, located in Skamania County in southwestern Washington, is one of the most active volcanoes in the Cascade Range. Before May of 1980, it stood at 9,600 feet and was known as a symmetrical, snow-capped peak, visible from Portland. Indigenous tribes of the region, the Cowlitz, the Yakama, and the Klickitat, had long considered it a sacred and volatile mountain, referring to it in their oral histories as a place where the earth spoke and the sky listened. The mountain had been quiet since 1857. For over a century, it slept. Then, on March 20th, 1980, it began to wake. A series of earthquakes shook the area. Steam vents opened on the north face. A bulge formed on the mountainside, growing outward at a rate of 5 feet per day. Geologists monitored the activity. Warnings were issued. An exclusion zone was established. On the morning of May 18, 1980, at 8:32, the north face of the mountain collapsed in the largest landslide in recorded history. The eruption that followed released 24 megatons of thermal energy, equivalent to over 1,000 atomic bombs. The blast leveled 230 square miles of forest. 57 people died. Ash fell across 11 states. The devastation was absolute. Entire valleys were buried under hundreds of feet of mud and debris. Rivers boiled. Lakes disappeared. The landscape was rendered unrecognizable, gray, lifeless, and silent. Aerial surveys conducted in the days following the eruption showed a world erased, covered in a thick blanket of volcanic ash that would take decades to recover from. Except for one place. Iron Creek Canyon is a narrow, steep-walled drainage on the eastern edge of the blast zone, approximately 8 miles from the crater. Before the eruption, it was a forested ravine cut by a small perennial stream surrounded by Douglas fir and western red cedar. Topographic maps from 1979 show it as unremarkable terrain. No settlements, no roads, no infrastructure. It was remote even by the standards of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. On the morning of May 18th, Iron Creek Canyon sat directly in the path of the lateral blast. The pyroclastic flow, a superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and rock traveling at over 300 miles per hour, swept through the area at approximately 8:35. Everything in its path was obliterated. Trees were snapped at ground level. Soil was scoured to bedrock. The temperature exceeded 700 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 hours later, a USGS helicopter conducting damage assessment flew over Iron Creek Canyon. The pilot, a man named Robert Morales, noted in his flight log that the canyon appeared clear, not partially clear, not recovering, clear, no ash, no debris. The trees were gone, but the ground was exposed, dark soil and stone, as though the blast had never touched it. Morales radioed the observation to the command center at the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest headquarters. He was told to continue his survey route. He did not return to the site that day. 2 days later, a ground team was dispatched to investigate. The team consisted of 3 geologists, Dr. Patricia Esquivel, Dr. Raymond Kowalski, and a field assistant named Michael Byrne. They hiked into Iron Creek Canyon from the south, wearing respirators and protective gear. The surrounding landscape was buried under 6 to 8 inches of ash. Fallen trees lay in parallel rows, all pointing away from the blast origin. The air smelled of sulfur and scorched earth. When they reached the canyon, the ash stopped. Dr. Esquivel described the boundary in her field report dated May 21, 1980. The transition was abrupt. Ash coverage ended at a clearly defined line, as though an invisible barrier had been erected. Beyond that line, the canyon floor was clean, not swept clean, genuinely untouched. We found no ash, no pumice, no residue of any kind. The ground was warm, not hot, warm like sun-baked stone in summer. The ambient temperature in the canyon was 15 degrees higher than the surrounding area. We had no explanation. The team collected soil samples, took temperature readings, and photographed the site. Dr. Kowalski attempted to measure magnetic fields and radiation levels. All equipment functioned normally. The readings showed nothing unusual, no magnetic anomalies, no elevated radiation, no chemical traces that would explain the absence of ash. Byrne, the field assistant, later said in an interview conducted in 2003, "It felt wrong, not dangerous, just wrong, like we were standing in a place that didn't want us there. The other two were focused on the science, taking measurements, filling sample bags. I just kept looking at the ground, trying to understand how it was possible. Everything around us was covered, but not there. It was like the canyon had said no." The team spent 4 hours in the canyon before returning to base. Their samples were sent to a USGS lab in Menlo Park, California. The soil analysis showed elevated temperatures, but no volcanic material. The report concluded, "Anomalous thermal retention, origin undetermined." The findings were filed. No follow-up investigation was scheduled. But there was something else, something that didn't appear in the official reports. On the night of May 18th, the day of the eruption, the Cowlitz County Emergency Dispatch Center received 17 calls from the Iron Creek area. The calls came in between 9:15 and 11:30 in the evening, hours after the eruption had subsided. All 17 calls were logged. None were answered in time. A dispatcher named Gloria Tennant, who worked that shift, later described the calls in a statement given to a local journalist in 1983. The lines were chaos that night. Everyone was calling. In, people looking for missing relatives, reports of injuries, requests for evacuation. But these 17 calls were different. They all came from the same area code, and they all said the same thing. I listened to the recordings later when things calmed down. Every single caller said they heard a voice, not a person, a voice, in the wind. They said it was speaking to them, calling them by name. And then the line would go dead. The recordings were kept in the county archive until 1991, when a fire destroyed the records building. No copies are known to exist. Tennant also noted that all 17 calls were traced to landlines in homes and ranger stations that had been completely destroyed by the blast. The phones should not have been functional. The infrastructure was gone, yet the calls came through. When questioned, the phone company provided no explanation. A representative stated, "We have no record of those calls. If they occurred, they were not routed through our network." In 1984, a team of volcanologists returned to Iron Creek Canyon to study long-term environmental recovery in the blast zone. The lead researcher, Dr. Thomas Vang, included Iron Creek as one of several survey sites. His report, published in the Journal of Volcanology and Geothermal Research in 1986, made no mention of the canyon's unusual condition in the immediate aftermath of the eruption. When contacted by a graduate student researching anomalies in the blast zone, Vang replied in a brief email, "I have no comment on Iron Creek. My team did not observe anything worth documenting." But a field notebook belonging to one of Vang's team members, obtained through a university archive request in 2008, told a different story. The notebook, kept by a geologist named Dr. Sophia Brennan, contained daily observations from the survey. The entry for September 12, 1984, read, "Arrived Iron Creek 0900 hours. Ground still elevated temp, no vegetation recovery, no ash deposition observed despite 4 years post-event." Vang ordered immediate departure, refused to discuss, instructed team to omit site from report. Brennan left the field of volcanology in 1987. She declined to be interviewed for this account. In 2001, a hiker named Derek Okonkwo posted on an online forum dedicated to Mount St. Helens recovery efforts. He described visiting Iron Creek Canyon and finding it strangely barren compared to surrounding areas that had begun to show regrowth. He wrote, "I expected to see plants, maybe some small trees. But it was empty, just dirt and rock, and it was warm. Not from the sun, it was an overcast day. The ground itself was warm. I stayed maybe 10 minutes. Felt like I was being watched." Okonkwo included GPS coordinates. Several other forum members attempted to visit the site based on his directions. 2 reported similar experiences. One noted that her camera malfunctioned while she was in the canyon. Every photo came out overexposed, as though flooded with light, despite the heavy cloud cover. The U.S. Forest Service was contacted in 2012 regarding public reports of unusual conditions in Iron Creek Canyon. A spokesperson provided the following statement: "Iron Creek Canyon is within the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument and is subject to ongoing ecological monitoring. Variations in soil temperature and vegetation recovery rates are expected in volcanic environments and do not indicate hazardous conditions. The area remains open to the public. No monitoring data has been made publicly available. The canyon is still there. It can be reached by a decommissioned logging road and a short off-trail hike. Vegetation has returned to most of the blast zone: fireweed, lupine, young alders reclaiming the gray soil. But Iron Creek remains sparse. The ground is darker than the surrounding terrain. And on certain days, particularly in the early morning or late evening, the air above the canyon shimmers, as though heated by something beneath." And somewhere in a county archive that no longer exists, there were 17 recordings of voices in the wind, calling names that no one should have known, all from phones that had been destroyed hours before the calls were made. There are marks on the land that are meant to be permanent. Lake Chelan sits in the North Cascades of Washington State, a 55-mile-long glacial lake carved during the last ice age. It is the 3rd deepest lake in the United States, reaching depths of 1,500 feet in some sections. The surrounding terrain is steep and rugged, granite peaks, narrow valleys, and forests of ponderosa pine that give way to alpine tundra at higher elevations. The lake has served as a transportation corridor for over a century, connecting the remote communities of Stehekin and Holden Village to the town of Chelan at its southern end. The area is sparsely populated. Much of it falls within the Lake Chelan Sawtooth Wilderness, a federally designated wilderness area where roads are prohibited and trails are primitive. Since the 1880s, the United States Geological Survey has installed brass survey markers across the American landscape, small discs embedded in bedrock or set in concrete, each stamped with coordinates, elevation data, and a unique identification number. These markers serve as fixed reference points for mapping, construction, scientific research, and land management. They are designed to last indefinitely. Removing one is a federal offense. Damaging one is prosecuted. The markers are not meant to disappear. Between 2003 and 2011, 34 survey markers within a 12-mile radius of Lake Chelan vanished without explanation. The first disappearance was noticed in June of 2003 by a surveyor named Daniel Kowalczyk, working on a boundary dispute for a private land parcel near Antolon Lake, approximately 4 miles north of Lake Chelan. Kowalczyk had used the same benchmark, marker designation PX4732, on 3 previous occasions. The marker had been set in granite bedrock in 1958 and was listed in excellent condition in the USGS database. When Kowalczyk arrived at the coordinates, the marker was gone. Not pried out, not vandalized. Gone. The bedrock surface was smooth and unbroken, as though the marker had never existed. Kowalczyk checked his GPS coordinates. He checked his topographic map. He was in the right place. He filed a report with the USGS Pacific Northwest Office, noting the marker as missing and requesting clarification. The response, dated July 9, 2003, stated, "Field verification required. Possible coordinate error or database discrepancy." Kowalczyk returned to the site with a colleague, a land surveyor named Rebecca Simmons. They brought a metal detector and ground-penetrating radar equipment. The metal detector found nothing. The radar showed solid granite extending 12 feet below the surface. No voids, no cavities, no buried metal. Simmons later said in a phone interview, "I've been doing this for 20 years. Markers get stolen sometimes. People want souvenirs, or they don't like the government. But you can tell when something's been removed. There are tool marks, broken rock, disturbed soil. This was different. It was like the rock had grown back over it." Over the following months, other surveyors working in the region began reporting similar findings. Markers that had been documented and photographed as recently as 2002 were no longer present. By December of 2004, the USGS had received reports of 12 missing markers in the Lake Chelan area. By 2007, the count had reached 26. By 2011, 34 markers, every marker within a 12-mile radius of the lake, had disappeared. The pattern was consistent. The markers were not removed. The surfaces where they had been installed showed no evidence of disturbance. In several cases, surveyors found faint depressions in the rock, slight indentations matching the diameter of the marker discs, but no metal, no drill holes, no trace of the original installation. A geologist named Dr. Marcus Odinaka was contracted by the USGS in 2008 to investigate the phenomenon. Dr. Odinaka specialized in rock weathering and erosion processes. He visited 6 of the missing marker sites and collected core samples from the bedrock. His report, submitted in March of 2009, concluded, "No evidence of chemical dissolution, mechanical weathering, or human removal. Rock composition consistent with formation age. Surface smoothness suggests natural geological processes over timescales of 10,000 years or more. The observed condition is inconsistent with markers installed within the past 50 years. In other words, the rock looked too old, too undisturbed, as though the markers had been gone for millennia, not years." Dr. Odinaka's report included a handwritten addendum. "I cannot explain this. The granite at these sites shows no stress fractures, no recent alterations. If the markers were removed, the rock should show damage. If they were not removed, they should still be there. Neither is the case." The USGS response was to replace the markers. In August of 2009, a field crew installed new survey markers at 8 of the missing locations. These new markers were equipped with GPS transmitters, small battery-powered devices designed to report their location every 24 hours. The transmitters were embedded within the markers and sealed with epoxy resin. The technology had been developed for monitoring tectonic movement and landslide activity. It was considered reliable. Within 72 hours, all 8 transmitters went offline. The last data packets received from the devices showed impossible coordinates. Marker NX8811, installed at an elevation of 3,200 feet on a ridge above Lake Chelan, transmitted a final location reading that placed it at 2,600 feet, 600 feet below its installation point deep within. Solid rock. Marker NX8814, installed on a granite outcrop at 4,000 feet, transmitted coordinates placing it at 3,400 feet inside the mountain itself. The field crew returned to the sites. All 8 markers were gone. The bedrock was smooth. The GPS transmitters were never recovered. A technician named Yuki Fujimoto, who had installed the GPS units, later wrote in an internal email, "I checked those transmitters before we embedded them. They were working perfectly. 72 hours later, they're reporting locations that don't exist. Either the GPS system is fundamentally broken, which it isn't, or those markers ended up somewhere we can't reach." The USGS quietly discontinued the replacement program. No official explanation was provided. When questioned by a journalist from High Country News in 2012, a spokesperson stated, "Budget constraints have necessitated prioritization of survey marker maintenance in high-traffic and high-use areas. Remote wilderness locations are being reassessed for necessity." The statement did not address the disappearances. It did not mention the GPS failures. It did not acknowledge the geological impossibility of what had occurred. A researcher named Dr. Adriana Volkov, who had been studying geomagnetic anomalies in the North Cascades, learned of the missing markers in 2013 and requested access to the USGS data. Her request was denied. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request. The USGS provided 14 pages of heavily redacted material. The only legible sections were installation dates and marker identification numbers. All references to GPS data, geological analysis, and field observations had been blacked out. Dr. Volkov visited the area independently in July of 2014. She brought a handheld magnetometer and a high-precision GPS unit. She hiked to 3 of the missing marker locations. At each site, her magnetometer registered fluctuations, brief pulses of magnetic activity lasting 3 to 5 seconds, repeating at irregular intervals. Her GPS unit, normally accurate to within 3 feet, showed location errors of up to 50 feet, coordinates that jumped and shifted even as she stood still. She documented her findings in a personal blog post. "I have worked in geophysics for 15 years. I have measured magnetic fields in volcanic zones, near fault lines, and in areas of intense mineral concentration. What I measured near Lake Chelan does not fit any known pattern. The fluctuations are localized, repeating, and seemingly unconnected to any geological process. And the GPS errors, those are even stranger. It's as though the ground itself is uncertain about where it is." Dr. Volkov attempted to return to the sites in 2015. She was denied access by the Forest Service, which cited ongoing environmental assessments in the area. No details were provided. No timeline was given for when access might be restored. The area remains open to the public. Hikers and backpackers visit regularly. But the survey markers are gone, and no new markers have been installed. In 2018, a hiker named Patrick O'Sullivan posted on a wilderness forum about finding a strange, smooth circle in the granite near Purple Pass, about 10 miles from Lake Chelan. He described it as perfectly round, roughly 4 inches in diameter, and slightly recessed into the rock, as though something had been there and had sunk into the stone. He included a photograph. The circle matched the dimensions of a USGS survey marker. 3 other hikers responded to the post, each describing similar findings at different locations around the lake. None had seen an actual marker, only the depressions, only the empty circles in the rock. And somewhere in a USGS database, there are coordinates for 34 markers that no longer exist. Points on a map that lead to smooth stone and silence, to places where the earth has quietly erased the marks that humans tried to make permanent. The granite remembers nothing, and the markers, wherever they are, have stopped transmitting. Some fires burn without consuming anything at all. The Colville National Forest spans nearly 1 million acres across northeastern Washington, a landscape of ponderosa pine, lodgepole, and open meadows that extends from the Kettle River Range to the Selkirk Mountains. The forest is remote, even by Pacific Northwest standards. The nearest town of any size is Colville, population 5,000, and much of the backcountry sees fewer than a dozen visitors per year. The terrain is characterized by steep ridges, narrow valleys, and isolated plateaus, areas where visibility is limited and cell phone coverage non-existent. It is the kind of place where a person can disappear without much effort, and where the forest keeps its secrets close. In the summer of 1967, the region experienced moderate drought conditions. Fire danger was elevated, but not extreme. The U.S. Forest Service maintained 3 active fire lookout towers in the area: Summit Peak, Bald Mountain, and Sherlock Peak. Each tower was staffed by a single lookout whose job was to scan the horizon for smoke and report any sightings to the district ranger station. The system had been in place since the 1930s and was considered reliable. Fires were detected early. Responses were swift. The forest was protected. On the evening of August 7, 1967, all 3 lookouts reported smoke rising from the same location, a remote section of forest approximately 12 miles northeast of the town of Republic, near the headwaters of Granite Creek. The smoke was described as a single column, dark gray, rising vertically in calm air. The lookouts triangulated the position and radioed the coordinates to the ranger station. A fire crew was dispatched at first light the following morning. The crew consisted of 6 firefighters led by a foreman named Lawrence Dietrich, a veteran of 15 fire seasons. They hiked into the area at dawn, carrying hand tools, water packs, and radio equipment. The coordinates placed the fire on a flat, timbered bench above the creek, accessible terrain, relatively easy to reach. They expected to find a small ground fire, perhaps started by lightning, smoldering in duff and leaf litter. They found nothing, no smoke, no fire, no heat. The forest was intact. The trees showed no signs of scorching. The ground was dry but unburned. Dietrich radioed back to the station and reported no fire at the given coordinates. He was told to search the surrounding area. The crew spent 4 hours walking a grid pattern, checking drainages and ridgelines. They found no evidence of combustion. That evening, the smoke appeared again. All 3 lookouts reported it at the same time, 6:45 in the evening. Same location, same appearance. A single dark column rising into still air. The next morning, another crew was sent in. This time they brought infrared equipment, handheld thermal scanners capable of detecting residual heat from fires that had burned out. They found nothing, no heat signatures, no ash, no charred wood. The forest was undisturbed. The smoke returned that evening, and the next, and the next. For 11 consecutive nights, from August 7th through August 17th, the smoke appeared between 6:30 and 7 in the evening. It was visible from all 3 fire towers. It was photographed by a reporter from the Spokesman Review newspaper who had driven out after hearing rumors of the phenomenon. The photographs, published on August 12th, showed a clear column of dark smoke rising above the tree line, backlit by the setting sun. Search teams entered the area every morning. They found nothing. A lookout named Margaret Finley, stationed at Bald Mountain Tower, kept a detailed log of her observations. Her entries, preserved in the Colville National Forest archives, describe the smoke as consistent in volume and color, appearing at approximately the same time each evening, dissipating after 40 to 50 minutes. She also noted, "The smoke does not behave like wildfire smoke. It does not drift. It does not thicken or thin. It simply rises straight up, as though from a chimney." Another lookout, a man named Gerald Vasquez at Summit Peak, wrote in his log, "Smoke reported again tonight. I have been watching fires for 12 years. This is not fire smoke. I don't know what it is." On August 14th, a larger search effort was organized. A team of 14 firefighters, 2 forest rangers, and a fire behavior analyst named Dr. Howard Kimura entered the area. They brought camping gear and planned to stay overnight, hoping to observe the smoke as it appeared. They set up camp a quarter mile from the reported coordinates and waited. At 6:38, the smoke began. Dr. Kimura described it in his field report. The smoke appeared suddenly, not gradually. One moment there was nothing. The next moment, a column of smoke was rising from the trees. We approached immediately. The smoke seemed to originate from a small clearing, perhaps 30 feet in diameter. We reached the clearing within 3 minutes. There was no fire, no smoldering material, no source. The smoke was there, we could see it, we could smell it, but there was nothing producing it. The smell, according to multiple witnesses, was unusual, not wood smoke, not chemical, something organic but unidentifiable. Dr. Kimura wrote, "The odor was faint but distinct, similar to burning vegetation, but with a sharpness, almost medicinal." The team remained in the clearing as the smoke continued to rise around them. They measured the air temperature, 63 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with the ambient temperature. They tested for carbon monoxide. The detector showed nothing. They photographed the clearing from multiple angles. The smoke appeared in the photographs. After 45 minutes, the smoke stopped. It did not dissipate gradually. It simply stopped, as though turned off. The team examined the clearing closely. The ground was covered in grass, native bunch grass and scattered wildflowers. The grass showed an unusual growth pattern. Instead of growing outward in all directions, it grew inward, with all the blades leaning toward the center of the clearing. Dr. Kimura noted this in his report, but offered no explanation. The team stayed through the night. No smoke appeared. At dawn, they searched the clearing again and found something they had missed in the evening light, a small leather notebook partially buried in soil near the center of the clearing. The notebook was weathered but intact. It bore the stamp of the U.S. Forest Service and had been issued to a ranger named Thomas O'Malley. O'Malley had been assigned to the Colville district in the early 1950s. He had retired in 1959. The notebook appeared to be from his tenure, though it contained only one entry, written in pencil on the first page. The entry was undated. It read, "It wasn't smoke, nothing else." The remaining pages were blank. Dr. Kimura included the notebook in his evidence collection and noted its discovery in his report. When he attempted to contact O'Malley for clarification, he learned that O'Malley had died in 1964. No family could be located. On the evening of August 17th, the smoke appeared for the 11th and final time. The search teams observed it from the clearing. At 7:22, it stopped. It did not return. The Forest Service compiled all reports, photographs, and field notes into a case file. The file was reviewed by the regional office in Missoula, Montana. In September of 1967, a memo was issued concluding that the smoke had been the result of atmospheric conditions producing visual anomalies combined with observer expectation bias. The memo recommended no further action. Dr. Kimura disputed the conclusion in a written response. He noted that atmospheric conditions could not explain the consistent timing, the photographic evidence, or the physical characteristics observed in the clearing. His response was acknowledged but not addressed. He left the Forest Service in 1969 and took a position with the National Park Service in Alaska. He declined to discuss the incident in later years. The photographs taken by the Spokesman Review were published but generated little public interest. The story was brief, 3 paragraphs on page 7, describing the smoke as an unexplained forest phenomenon and noting that no fire had been found. No follow-up articles were written. Margaret Finley, the lookout at Bald Mountain, continued working for the Forest Service until her retirement in 1983. In a letter to a friend, written in 1976, and later donated to a regional historical society, she described the smoke as the strangest thing I ever saw in my career. She wrote, "I reported hundreds of fires over 20 years. I know what smoke looks like. I know how it moves, how it smells, how it behaves. What we saw in '67 was smoke, but it came from nothing, and when we tried to find it, it wasn't there." The clearing near Granite Creek is still accessible, though few people visit. The grass still grows inward. Hikers who stumble upon it occasionally post photos online, noting the unusual growth pattern and asking if anyone knows why it occurs. No satisfactory explanation has been offered. And somewhere in a Forest Service archive in Missoula, there is a case file stamped "Closed, no action required," containing field reports, photographs, and witness statements that describe 11 nights of smoke rising from a forest that wasn't burning. And a notebook with a single line written by a man who saw something he could not explain and chose to leave only a warning, not a description. It wasn't smoke. But if it wasn't smoke, then what was it? The forest has never answered. There are places where sound takes longer to return than it should. Boulder Cave sits in the eastern foothills of the Cascade Range, roughly 20 miles northwest of Natchez, Washington. The cave is a natural lava tube, a tunnel formed thousands of years ago when the outer surface of a lava flow cooled and hardened while molten rock continued to flow beneath, eventually draining away and leaving a hollow passage. The surrounding terrain is dry and forested, dominated by ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, with steep ridges and narrow creek drainages cutting through volcanic basalt. The cave itself is relatively accessible, a short hike from a Forest Service road, and for decades it was a popular destination for families and amateur spelunkers. A wooden walkway was installed in the 1960s, allowing visitors to walk through the main passage without technical equipment. The cave is not large by speleological standards. Forest Service literature from the 1980s described it as approximately 470 feet long, with a ceiling height varying between 8 and 20 feet. A small creek flows through the cave year-round, entering at the upper end and exiting through a narrow opening at the lower end. The temperature inside remains constant, around 42 degrees Fahrenheit, and the acoustics are notable. Voices carry well. Footsteps echo. It is the kind of cave where people clap their hands or shout just to hear the sound come back. Except the sound comes back wrong. The first documented observation of the anomaly appeared in a trip report filed by a geology class from Central Washington University in May of 1987. The report, archived in the university's Earth Sciences Department, noted that students conducting an acoustic survey of the cave observed unexpectedly long echo intervals inconsistent with measured cave dimensions. The instructor, a professor named Dr. Elaine Kowalski, followed up with a more detailed study in September of that year, bringing calibrated sound equipment and timing devices. Dr. Kowalski's findings were clear. Sounds produced in the cave's main chamber returned as echoes approximately 19 seconds after the initial sound. Based on the speed of sound in air, roughly 1,100 feet per second, and the known dimensions of the cave, echoes should have returned in 2 to 3 seconds. 19 seconds would require the sound to travel over 20,000 feet, more than 3.5 miles. The cave was not 3.5 miles long. Dr. Kowalski repeated the experiment multiple times using hand claps, voice calls, and electronic tone generators. The results were consistent. The echo delay was always between 18 and 20 seconds, regardless of where in the cave the sound originated. She documented her findings in a paper submitted to the Journal of Cave and Karst Studies in 1988. The paper was rejected. The editor's response cited measurement error and insufficient peer review. She submitted to 2 other journals. Both declined publication. In 1991, a team of speleologists from the National Speleological Society conducted a comprehensive survey of Boulder Cave as part of a regional cave mapping project. The team included experienced cavers and surveyors who used laser rangefinders, GPS units, and traditional surveying techniques. Their final map confirmed the cave's length at 470 feet and its maximum depth at approximately 60 feet below the surface. During the survey, one of the team members, a caver named Michael Rousseau, conducted an informal acoustic test. He dropped a microphone attached to a long cable into a narrow vertical shaft at the rear of the cave, a feature that had been noted but not fully explored due to its restrictive size. The shaft descended beyond the reach of their lights. Rousseau lowered the microphone as far as the cable allowed, approximately 200 feet, and then released it, letting it fall freely while recording. The microphone hit bottom 23 seconds later. Rousseau's equipment recorded the impact clearly, a sharp crack followed by the sound of small rocks tumbling. 23 seconds of free fall would place the impact at over 8,000 feet deep, accounting for air resistance. The surveyed depth of the cave was 60 feet. The microphone cable was 200 feet long. The numbers did not reconcile. Rousseau retrieved the microphone. The cable showed no signs of snagging or tangling. The microphone was intact, but covered in a fine white powder that later analysis identified as limestone dust. Boulder Cave is a basalt lava tube. There is no limestone in the area. The team filed their survey report with the National Speleological Society and included a note about the acoustic anomaly and the microphone drop. The note described the findings as requiring further investigation, but offered no conclusions. Rousseau later told a colleague, "We couldn't explain it, so we wrote it down and moved on. That's what you do when something doesn't make sense. You document it and let someone else figure it out." No one ever did. In July of 1992, a Forest Service ranger named Patricia Delgado was leading a guided tour through Boulder Cave when she noticed something unusual. A group of 6 visitors had entered the cave ahead of her, and she could hear them talking as they walked along the wooden walkway. Their voices echoed normally at first, quick, sharp reflections off the cave walls. But as the group moved deeper into the cave, the echoes began to lag. Delgado described it in a written statement submitted to her supervisor. It was like listening to a delay effect, the kind you hear in music. They would speak, and a moment later, several seconds later, I would hear their words come back. But the delay kept getting longer. By the time they reached the back of the cave, the echo was coming back so late I couldn't tell which words were theirs and which were the echo. Delgado also noted that some of the visitors became disoriented. 2 of them complained of dizziness. One woman sat down on the walkway and refused to continue, saying the cave felt wrong. The group exited without incident, but Delgado filed a report recommending that the cave be evaluated for safety concerns. The Forest Service responded by conducting an inspection in October of 1992. The inspection report noted no structural deficiencies and no safety hazards. It made no mention of acoustic anomalies. Delgado's report was filed and not followed up. In March of 1993, Boulder Cave was abruptly closed to the public. The official reason, posted on a sign at the trailhead, stated, "Closed for structural evaluation and safety assessment. Reopening date to be determined." No additional information was provided. Calls to the Natchez Ranger District were met with the same response. The cave was closed pending further evaluation. The cave never reopened. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2006 by a local hiking advocacy group sought documents related to the closure. The Forest Service provided 11 pages, most of which were budget memos and maintenance records. One internal memo, dated February 1993, recommended closure due to unspecified geophysical irregularities requiring expert assessment. No assessment report was included. No experts were identified. A follow-up request in 2009 asked specifically about the geophysical irregularities. The response stated, "Records from that period are incomplete. No additional documentation is available." Dr. Kowalski, the geologist who had first documented the echo anomaly, attempted to gain access to the cave in 2004 for follow-up research. Her request was denied. The Forest Service cited ongoing safety concerns, but provided no details. Dr. Kowalski retired from teaching in 2007. In a final interview before her retirement, she said, I spent my career studying how sound moves through rock and air. I understand acoustics. I understand geology. What I heard in that cave, what I measured, should not be possible. And the fact that no one wants to investigate it further tells me they either don't believe it or they do believe it and don't want anyone else to know. The cave remains closed. The wooden walkway has deteriorated. The entrance is gated and locked. Occasional hikers post photos online, peering through the gate into the darkness beyond. Some report hearing sounds from inside, dripping water, shifting rocks, and occasionally faint echoes that seem to come from nowhere. In 2018, a sound engineer named Marcus Fujita visited the area with high-sensitivity recording equipment, hoping to capture audio from outside the cave entrance. He set up microphones near the gate and recorded for 6 hours. When he reviewed the recordings later, he found something unexpected. Periodic low-frequency pulses occurring at intervals of approximately 19 seconds. The pulses were below the range of human hearing but clearly visible on a spectrogram. Fujita described them as regular, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He posted the recordings online. They received little attention, and somewhere deep beneath the Cascade foothills, in a cave that should be 470 feet long but echoes as though it were miles deep, sound continues to travel through passages that no map has ever shown. 19 seconds late. Every time, without fail. Some trees grow backward through time. Deception Pass State Park occupies nearly 4,000 acres across Whidbey and Fidalgo Islands in northwestern Washington, connected by a steel bridge that spans the churning waters below. The area has been inhabited for thousands of years. Coast Salish peoples knew it as a place of strong currents and shifting tides, where the ocean and Puget Sound meet in perpetual turbulence. The name Deception Pass comes from British explorer George Vancouver, who in 1792 believed Whidbey Island was a peninsula until he discovered the narrow strait that separated it from the mainland. The land is dense with Douglas fir, western red cedar, and Sitka spruce, trees that can live for centuries, recording their history in concentric rings of growth. The park sees hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, drawn to its dramatic coastline, hiking trails, and old-growth forests. Most stay near the beach or the bridge. Few venture into the interior sections, where the trails narrow and the forest closes in. One such area, located on the western slope of Goose Rock, a 400-foot peak on Whidbey Island, has been quietly avoided by park maintenance crews since the mid-1990s. There are no signs explaining why, no warnings posted, just an absence of trail maintenance and a subtle redirection of marked paths. The anomaly was first identified in the summer of 1992 by a dendrochronologist named Dr. Nora Abimbola, who had been contracted by Washington State Parks to conduct a forest health assessment. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, is a precise science. Each ring represents 1 year of growth. The width of the ring indicates climatic conditions. The chemical composition reveals atmospheric changes. By counting inward from the bark to the center, researchers can determine a tree's age and reconstruct centuries of environmental history. Dr. Abimbola was conducting routine core sampling, extracting pencil-thin cylinders of wood from living trees using a hollow drill called an increment borer. The samples would be analyzed in a lab, the rings counted and measured. It was standard work, methodical, and predictable. She had done it hundreds of times. On July 23, 1992, she extracted a core sample from a Douglas fir approximately 18 inches in diameter, located on a forested slope roughly half a mile southeast of Goose Rock Summit. The tree appeared healthy. The bark was intact. There were no visible signs of disease or stress. She labeled the sample, placed it in a protective tube, and moved to the next tree. Back at the University of Washington lab, she began her analysis. Under magnification, the rings were clearly visible, dark late wood bands alternating with lighter early wood. She began counting from the outside in, as protocol required. The outer rings showed characteristics consistent with growth in the late 1980s and early 1990s, narrow rings indicating drought years, wider rings from wetter periods. The pattern matched known climate data. Then, approximately 3 inches from the bark, the pattern reversed. The rings began showing characteristics of older growth, much older. Dr. Abimbola ran carbon-14 dating on samples from different depths within the core. The results were impossible. The outermost rings, formed most recently, dated to the 1970s and 1980s. The innermost rings, theoretically the oldest part of the tree, dated to the 1890s. The tree was growing backward. Dr. Abimbola assumed contamination. She repeated the analysis with fresh samples from the same tree. The results were identical. She collected samples from 6 other trees in the immediate area, all within a quarter-mile radius. 5 showed the same reversal. 1 showed normal growth patterns. She documented her findings in a preliminary report submitted to the Washington State Parks Commission in September of 1992. The report described the anomaly as unprecedented in dendrochronological literature and recommended immediate follow-up study. She requested funding for a comprehensive survey of the area, additional carbon dating, and consultation with colleagues in the field. The funding was approved. Dr. Abimbola returned to the site in May of 1993 with 2 graduate students, Marcus Petrov and Jessica Yamamoto. They expanded the survey area, collecting samples from 40 trees across a half-mile section of forest. The work took 3 weeks. They camped on site, hiked the terrain daily, and maintained detailed field notes. Petrov later described the experience in an interview conducted in 2009. It was quiet there, not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. We didn't see any wildlife the entire time, no birds, no squirrels, nothing. Nora noticed it first. She mentioned that the forest felt too still. We joked about it at the time, but after a few days, it started to bother us. You expect to hear something, even in a dense forest there's sound, but there wasn't. Yamamoto's field journal, donated to the University Archive after her death in 2015, contained similar observations. One entry, dated May 19, 1993, read, "Collected 12 samples today, all from within the central zone. Weather clear, temp 58 degrees. Noticed something odd. Our compass readings kept drifting. Not spinning, just drifting. Off by 10 to 15 degrees. Checked twice. Same result. Nora says it's probably mineral deposits in the soil. Marcus doesn't think so." The team completed their sampling and returned to the lab. The analysis took 4 months. Of the 40 trees sampled, 32 showed reversed growth patterns. The carbon dating was consistent, outer rings older than inner rings, with dates spanning from the 1880s to the 1990s, inverting the expected chronology. Dr. Abimbola consulted with dendrochronologists at 3 other universities. She sent samples for independent verification. The results came back the same. No one could explain it. Theories were proposed: contamination from groundwater, localized atmospheric anomalies, calibration errors in the carbon dating equipment. None held up under scrutiny. In December of 1993, Dr. Abimbola submitted a draft of her final report to the Journal of Dendrochronology. The report detailed the methodology, the findings, and the lack of plausible explanations. It concluded with a recommendation for further study and peer review. The journal's editorial board requested revisions. Dr. Abimbola complied. The revised draft was submitted in March of 1994. It was never published. In May of 1994, Dr. Abimbola received a letter from the journal editor stating that the paper had been withdrawn due to concerns regarding data integrity and reproducibility. No specifics were provided. Dr. Abimbola requested clarification. The editor did not respond. She submitted the paper to 2 other journals. Both rejected it without review. In August of 1994, Dr. Abimbola received a visit from 2 representatives of the Washington State Parks Commission. The meeting was documented in a memo written by Dr. Abimbola and later found among her personal papers. The memo stated, "Visitors requested return of all samples collected from Deception Pass site. Cited administrative requirements and ongoing internal review." I complied. Samples were collected and signed for. No explanation provided for why samples taken under contract were being reclaimed. Dr. Abimbola attempted to follow up with the Parks Commission. Her calls were not returned. Letters went unanswered. In January of 1995, she took a leave of absence from the university. In June of 1995, she resigned. She moved to Vermont and took a position with a private environmental consulting firm. She never returned to dendrochronology. Petrov and Yamamoto completed their graduate degrees but did not pursue the Deception Pass research. When contacted years later, both declined to discuss the project in detail. Petrov said only, "It was a strange situation. The data was solid, but no one wanted to publish it. After a while, you move on." The half-mile section of forest near Goose Rock remains part of Deception Pass State Park. It is accessible. There are no gates, no warnings, no signage indicating anything unusual. But the trails in that area have not been maintained. Brush has overgrown the paths. Fallen trees block access. Park maps from 2005 onward show the trail network redirected, looping around the area rather than through it. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2012 sought all documents related to Dr. Abimbola's contract and research. The Parks Commission provided 32 pages, heavily redacted. Most were budget approvals and contract agreements. One internal memo, dated November 1993, included a single unredacted sentence: "Recommend suspension of public access pending further evaluation." No evaluation report was ever released. In 2017, a hiker named Kevin Dumont posted on a regional hiking forum about visiting the area. He described finding a group of large Douglas firs that didn't look right. He wrote, "I'm not a scientist, but I've been hiking these woods for 20 years. These trees looked old and young at the same time. The bark was thick, like an old tree, but the branches were thin and the needles were too green. It didn't make sense. I took some photos, but when I got home and looked at them, the trees just looked normal. I don't know how to explain it." 3 other forum users replied, claiming they had experienced something similar in the same area. One wrote, "The forest there feels like it's waiting for something. I don't know what, but I won't go back. The trees are still standing, still growing, still recording time in rings that refuse to follow the rules. And somewhere in a storage facility in Vermont, there may still be core samples that show the impossible, a forest growing backward, ring by ring, year by year, toward a beginning that hasn't happened yet." There are lakes where the water speaks in voices that were never taught to it. Ozette Lake lies in the northwestern corner of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, 3 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean. It is the 3rd largest natural lake in the state, covering nearly 7 square miles, with depths reaching 300 feet in some areas. The lake sits within the traditional territory of the Maka people, who have lived along this coast for thousands of years. Their ancestors built villages on the lakeshore, and oral histories speak of the lake as a place of power, a boundary between the living world and something older. The forest surrounding Ozette is temperate rainforest, dense with Sitka spruce and western hemlock, where rainfall exceeds 120 inches per year, and fog settles into the valleys for days at a time. The lake is remote. No paved roads lead directly to it. The nearest town, Clallam Bay, is 20 miles away. Access is by logging road or hiking trail. There are no marinas, no boat launches, no commercial activity. The few who fish here bring canoes or small motorboats carried in on trailers. The water is dark, stained brown by tannins from decaying vegetation, and visibility below the surface is poor. The lake is cold year-round, fed by snowmelt and rain. It is not a place where people swim. It is a place where people listen. The first documented report came in June of 1998. A fisherman named Gerald Kowalski, a retired Boeing engineer from Port Angeles, was fishing for kokanee salmon near the lake's northern shore. The day was calm. No wind. The water was glassy and still. Kowalski was alone in his aluminum boat, drifting approximately 50 yards from shore, in water he estimated at 80 feet deep. He later described the experience in a letter to the Olympic National Park superintendent. I heard voices, not just sound, words, full sentences. I thought at first there was another boat nearby, maybe someone talking on a radio or shouting to a friend. But there was no one else on the lake. I looked around. Nothing. The voices were coming from below, directly beneath my boat. I could hear them clearly, like people having a conversation in the next room. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. They were speaking English, normal conversation. Then, at exactly 4:04 in the afternoon, I checked my watch. The voices stopped, just cut off mid-sentence. Kowalski reported the incident to park rangers the following day. The report was filed under Unusual Occurrence, Non-Emergency. No investigation was conducted. Over the next several years, similar reports accumulated. A fishing guide named Marcus Delgado, who worked the lake seasonally from 2001 to 2006, kept a logbook of client trips. In multiple entries, he noted hearing underwater voices during calm conditions. His clients reported the same phenomenon. Delgado wrote in an entry dated August 12, 2003. Heard them again today. Same as before. Sounds like a conversation. Can't tell what they're saying, but it's definitely speech. Client asked if there were divers below us. I told him no. The lake is 300 feet deep here. No one dives that deep without serious equipment, and there's nothing down there worth diving for anyway. Another fisherman, a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a marine biologist from the University of Washington, visited Ozette Lake in July of 2007 to conduct a fish population survey. She brought hydrophones, underwater microphones designed to record aquatic sounds. She deployed the equipment in various locations around the lake, recording ambient noise, fish activity, and any other acoustic phenomena. On July 18th, at approximately 3:45 in the afternoon, her hydrophones picked up something unexpected. Dr. Tanaka later described it in a research memo. The recording captured what can only be described as human speech. Multiple voices, overlapping at times, speaking in clear English. The audio quality is poor due to water distortion, but phonetic analysis confirms the presence of consonants, vowels, and sentence structure. The voices do not respond to external stimuli. We attempted to create noise near the hydrophones, dropping objects into the water, striking the boat hull, but the voices continued uninterrupted. At 16:04, the voices ceased abruptly. Dr. Tanaka submitted the recordings to the university's linguistics department for analysis. 2 professors independently reviewed the audio. Both confirmed that the recordings contained speech, grammatically structured, syntactically coherent English. One professor, Dr. Evelyn Okonkwo, noted in her report, "The speech patterns are consistent with conversational English, though the content is largely unintelligible due to acoustic interference. What is clear is that these are not random sounds. These are words formed intentionally, following linguistic rules." Dr. Tanaka attempted to publish her findings in the Journal of Aquatic Acoustics. The paper was rejected. The editor's response stated, The presented evidence, while intriguing, lacks sufficient context and reproducibility to meet publication standards. Without a clear source for the recorded phenomena, we cannot verify the integrity of the data. She submitted to 2 other journals. Both declined. In 2009, a documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Vargas traveled to Ozette Lake to investigate the reports. She brought professional recording equipment, underwater cameras, and a team of 3. They spent 5 days on the lake, recording continuously during daylight hours. On the 3rd day, at 3:52 in the afternoon, they heard the voices. Vargas described it in her production notes. "We were anchored in calm water, maybe 70 feet deep. The sound started faintly, then grew clearer. It was like listening to people talking in another room. You couldn't make out the exact words, but you could hear the rhythm, the inflection. Someone was asking a question. Someone else was answering. Then laughter, short, clipped. It lasted about 10 minutes. At 4:04, it stopped. Complete silence. We reviewed the footage later. The audio is there, clear as day, but there's nothing on the underwater cameras. No movement, no divers, no fish large enough to produce sound. Just voices." Vargas's documentary was never completed. Funding fell through. The footage was archived. In 2015, the National Park Service contracted an acoustic research firm to investigate the phenomenon. The firm, Cascade Acoustic Solutions, deployed a network of hydrophones across Ozette Lake and recorded continuously for 2 weeks in August. The lead researcher, Dr. Samuel O'Malley, produced a 40-page report summarizing the findings. The report confirmed the presence of human-like vocalizations occurring on multiple days, always during afternoon hours, always ceasing at or near 4:04. Spectral analysis showed frequency patterns consistent with human speech. The report noted, "The source of the vocalizations cannot be determined. Depth measurements place the apparent origin at between 100 and 200 feet below the surface, well beyond the range of casual diving and in conditions of near total darkness. No visual confirmation of human presence or equipment has been obtained. Attempts to communicate with the source via underwater speakers broadcasting questions and prompts produced no response." The report concluded, "While the recordings clearly contain structured vocalization consistent with human speech, no plausible natural or human-made source has been identified. Further study is recommended." No further study was authorized. The National Park Service issued a statement in October of 2015. Acoustic phenomena in lakes and other bodies of water can result from a variety of natural causes, including thermal layers, aquatic life, and underwater geological activity. The sounds reported at Ozette Lake are being monitored as part of ongoing environmental assessments. There is no evidence of any hazard to visitors. The statement did not address the speech patterns. It did not explain the consistent timing. It did not mention the linguistic analysis. Dr. O'Malley left Cascade Acoustic Solutions in 2016. In an exit interview, he stated, "I've spent 20 years studying underwater acoustics. I've recorded whales, dolphins, submarines, ships, and every kind of natural sound the ocean produces. What I heard at Ozette doesn't fit any category I know. It's not animal, it's not mechanical, it's speech. And I have no explanation for where it's coming from." The voices continue. Fishermen still report them. Online forums dedicated to fishing in the Pacific Northwest contain dozens of accounts, all describing the same phenomenon: clear conversational speech coming from deep water, always stopping at 4:04 in the afternoon. In 2022, a paddler named Kevin Brennan posted a video to social media. The video, filmed from his kayak on a calm August afternoon, captured 11 minutes of audio. The voices are audible in the recording, faint but unmistakable. Words blend together, sentences overlap, but the human quality is undeniable. At the end of the video, the sound cuts off. The timestamp reads 4:04. The video received minimal attention, a few hundred views, a handful of comments, most skeptical. But the voices remain. Beneath the still water of Ozette Lake, something continues to speak in a language it should not know, in a place where no speakers should be, holding conversations that no one can join, always stopping at 4:04, always starting again the next day, always just out of reach, beneath the dark water where the light does not go and the recordings cannot see. There are roads where the distance you travel is not the distance that exists. State Route 20, known as the North Cascades Highway, is one of the most scenic and treacherous mountain passes in Washington state. The highway stretches 140 miles from the Puget Sound lowlands to the arid eastern slopes of the Cascades, reaching an elevation of 5,400 feet at Washington Pass. Constructed over decades and completed in 1972, the road cuts through some of the most remote wilderness in the continental United States, jagged peaks, glacial valleys, and forests that see heavy snow from October through May. Each winter, the highway closes entirely, buried under avalanche debris and impassable drifts. It reopens in spring, and for 6 months it serves as the only east-west corridor through the North Cascades. The road is narrow, guardrails are sparse, the drop-offs are steep. Drivers are advised to keep their fuel tanks full, their phones charged, and their attention focused. There are few places to pull over, fewer places to turn around, and long stretches where cell service disappears entirely. It is a road that demands respect. Most who travel it do so carefully, watching their speed, counting the mileposts, and noting their progress. But between mileposts 147 and 148, something fundamental breaks down. The anomaly was first noted in the summer of 2004 by a cartographer named Dr. Patricia Esquivel, who was conducting a GPS accuracy assessment for the Washington State Department of Transportation. The project involved driving designated highway segments while recording GPS coordinates, comparing them to official milepost placements, and identifying any discrepancies that might affect navigation systems or emergency response. Dr. Esquivel drove Route 20 on June 15, 2004, during clear weather conditions. She used a professional-grade GPS unit calibrated to military specifications, accurate to within 3 feet. As she passed milepost 147, she reset her trip odometer to 0 and began recording. According to her GPS log, the distance between milepost 147 and milepost 148 measured 1.73 miles. Her vehicle's odometer, however, read 1.02 miles. She assumed instrument error and repeated the measurement in the opposite direction. The GPS recorded 1.71 miles. The odometer read 1.01 miles. Dr. Esquivel documented the discrepancy in her field report and flagged it for follow-up. The report was filed with the Department of Transportation in July of 2004. No immediate action was taken. In 2006, a highway maintenance crew reported a similar observation. The crew, led by a foreman named Vincent Harlow, had been tasked with repainting mile markers along Route 20. Standard procedure required measuring the distance between markers to ensure proper spacing. Using a surveyor's wheel, a mechanical device that clicks once per revolution, calculating distance based on wheel circumference, the crew measured the segment between mileposts 147 and 148. The wheel recorded 1 mile, exactly 1 mile. Harlow noted the measurement in his maintenance log and thought nothing of it. But when the crew's GPS unit was consulted for positioning data, it showed the mileposts as 1.7 miles apart. Harlow recalibrated the GPS. The reading remained the same. He reported the discrepancy to his supervisor, who forwarded it to the State Survey Office. The matter was assigned low priority. In 2008, the Washington State Department of Transportation commissioned a comprehensive resurvey of Route 20 to update mapping data and verify milepost accuracy. The project was contracted to a private surveying firm, Cascade Geomatics, and overseen by a licensed surveyor named Gerald Matsuda. Matsuda and his team used differential GPS equipment, devices that receive corrections from fixed ground stations, providing accuracy within inches. They also employed traditional surveying methods: total stations, electronic distance measurement, and physical wheel measurements. The goal was to create a definitive record of distances along the entire highway. They reached mileposts 147 and 148 in August of 2008. The team conducted 4 separate measurements over 2 days, using different equipment and different operators to eliminate human error. The results were consistent. GPS measurements showed 1.7 miles. Physical measurements, surveyor's wheel, electronic distance measurement, and total station triangulation showed 1 mile. Matsuda documented the findings in his report submitted in September of 2008. He noted, "The discrepancy cannot be explained by equipment malfunction, operator error, or environmental interference." GPS satellite signals were strong and unobstructed. Ground-based measurements were conducted under ideal conditions. The distance between mileposts 147 and 148 measures differently depending on the method used. This finding requires further investigation. The Department of Transportation responded in October. A senior engineer named Dr. Amara Okafor reviewed the report and requested additional verification. Matsuda's team returned to the site in November and repeated the measurements. The results were identical. Dr. Okafor's response, dated December 12, 2008, stated, "The reported discrepancy is noted. However, due to budget constraints and competing project priorities, further investigation is not feasible at this time. The matter will be revisited during the next scheduled highway audit." No audit was ever scheduled. The Ajin project was quietly closed. But the discrepancy remained, and others began to notice. A long-haul truck driver named Marcus O'Sullivan, who regularly drove Route 20 between Seattle and Spokane, posted on an industry forum in 2010. He described an oddity he had observed multiple times. Between mile markers 147 and 148, my GPS always tells me I'm further along than my odometer says. It's consistent, every time. I thought maybe my odometer was off, but it matches up everywhere else on the route. Just that 1 mile. My GPS thinks I'm traveling further than I actually am. Several other drivers responded, confirming the same experience. One wrote, "I've driven that stretch 100 times. I always feel like I'm covering ground faster than I should be, like the mile goes by too quick. I thought I was imagining it." A recreational cyclist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a physics professor at the University of Washington, rode Route 20 in the summer of 2012 as part of a charity event. She used a GPS-enabled cycling computer that recorded speed, distance, and elevation. After completing the ride, she reviewed her data and noticed the anomaly. She later wrote in a blog post, "Between mileposts 147 and 148, my GPS recorded 1.7 miles of travel. My bike computer, which calculates distance based on wheel rotations, recorded 1 mile. I checked the device calibration. It was accurate. I checked my route log. No errors. The numbers didn't match. I assumed it was a GPS glitch, but when I researched it, I found others had reported the same thing." Dr. Tanaka contacted the Department of Transportation and requested access to survey data for the highway segment. Her request was denied. The response, dated August 23, 2012, stated, "Survey data for Route 20 is not available for public distribution due to security and proprietary considerations." She filed a Freedom of Information Act request. The Department of Transportation provided 12 pages of heavily redacted material. The only legible information was milepost locations and installation dates. All technical survey data had been blacked out. In 2015, a geophysicist named Dr. Samuel Kowalczyk, who specialized in gravitational anomalies, read about the discrepancy in an online forum. He became interested in the possibility that localized variations in gravity or space-time curvature might affect GPS signals differently than physical measurements. Dr. Kowalczyk drove to the site in July of 2015 with a portable gravimeter, a device that measures gravitational field strength. He conducted readings at mileposts 147, 147.5, estimated, and 148. The gravimeter showed no unusual readings. Gravitational field strength was consistent with the surrounding terrain. Dr. Kowalczyk also used a laser rangefinder to measure the line-of-sight distance between the mileposts. The rangefinder confirmed 1 mile. He documented his findings in a research note, which he submitted to the Journal of Geophysical Research. The note was rejected. The editor's response stated, "Insufficient evidence of a geophysical phenomenon. The described discrepancy is more likely attributable to GPS satellite ephemeris errors or multipath interference." Dr. Kowalczyk disagreed but did not pursue publication further. He later said in an interview, "GPS relies on timing signals from satellites. If those signals are delayed or distorted by something in the environment, the calculated distance will be wrong. But that doesn't explain why the error is so consistent, so localized, and so specific to that 1 mile. I measured gravity. I measured distance. Everything was normal, except the GPS. And that's the part I can't explain." The Washington State Department of Transportation was contacted again in 2018 by a journalist investigating infrastructure anomalies. The spokesperson provided a written statement. Mile markers on State Route 20 are installed and maintained according to standard engineering practices. Any discrepancies between GPS-derived distances and physical measurements are attributable to limitations in consumer GPS technology, which is not designed for precision surveying. The department has no record of systemic measurement errors on Route 20. The statement did not address the professional-grade GPS equipment used in the original surveys. It did not mention the multiple independent verifications. It did not explain why the discrepancy occurred only between mileposts 147 and 148. The highway remains open. Thousands drive it every year. The mileposts are clearly marked. The pavement is maintained, but the distance between 147 and 148 continues to measure differently depending on how it is measured. GPS says 1.7 miles. Odometers say 1 mile. Surveyors' wheels say 1 mile. Laser rangefinders say 1 mile. And somewhere in a filing cabinet in Olympia, there is a survey report from 2008 that documents the impossible, a mile of highway that exists in 2 different lengths at the same time, depending on whether you measure it with satellites or with your feet. Drivers pass through it every day, covering a distance that their instruments cannot agree on, traveling a mile that is somehow longer than it is. And no one has ever explained where the missing distance goes. There are places where breath becomes visible longer than it should. The Hoh rainforest occupies the western slope of the Olympic Mountains in Washington State, one of the largest temperate rainforests in North America. Annual rainfall exceeds 140 inches, feeding moss-draped Sitka spruce and western hemlock that tower 300 feet above the forest floor. The ecosystem is ancient and dense, a cathedral of green where sunlight filters through layers of canopy and fog lingers in the understory even during summer months. The Hoh River Trail, maintained by Olympic National Park, runs 18 miles from the visitor center to Glacier Meadows at the base of Mount Olympus. The trail sees thousands of hikers each year, most traveling only the first few miles before turning back. Indigenous peoples of the Olympic Peninsula, the Ho, Quileute, and Quinault, have lived in these forests for millennia. Their oral traditions speak of the forest as a living entity, a place where boundaries thin and the natural world behaves according to rules that are not always consistent. Park rangers, when asked about these stories, typically offer polite acknowledgement but little elaboration. The forest is managed as wilderness. Its mysteries are cataloged as weather patterns, microclimates, and ecological phenomena. What cannot be explained is often not discussed. But some things demand documentation. The first recorded observation came from a park ranger named Thomas Vasquez in January of 2003. Vasquez was conducting a routine winter patrol along the Ho River Trail, checking for storm damage and trail conditions. The morning was cold, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, with no wind. Fog hung low in the trees. Visibility was limited to 50 feet. At approximately mile marker 1.3, Vasquez exhaled and watched his breath condense in the cold air. The vapor cloud hung in front of his face, as expected. But it did not dissipate. It remained suspended, motionless, for what Vasquez later estimated as 15 to 20 seconds. Then, instead of falling or drifting with the slight air currents that exist even in still conditions, the vapor rose slowly upward and vanished into the canopy. Vasquez documented the observation in his patrol log. The entry, dated January 9, 2003, read, "Observed unusual vapor behavior at MP 1.3. Breath condensation remained stationary for extended period before rising vertically. No wind detected. Temperature stable at 28 degrees. Visibility poor due to fog." He mentioned the incident to a colleague, who suggested it was an optical illusion caused by the fog. Vasquez did not pursue the matter. Over the following winters, other hikers and rangers began reporting similar experiences. The observations were consistent. On cold, windless mornings, breath would freeze in the air and hang visibly for extended periods, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, sometimes half a minute, before dissipating upward. The phenomenon occurred only in a specific section of the trail, roughly between mile markers 1.2 and 1.4, a stretch of approximately 200 yards. A hiker named Dr. Miriam O'Sullivan, a respiratory therapist from Seattle, experienced it firsthand in December of 2007. She described it in an email to the park's Visitor Services Office. "I've worked with breathing and respiration for 20 years. I understand condensation, vapor pressure, and how exhalation behaves in cold air. What I saw on the Ho Trail was not normal. My breath formed a cloud, as expected, but it didn't move. It hung there, perfectly still, like it was suspended in gel. I waved my hand through it, and it dispersed slightly, but then reformed. After maybe 25 seconds, it started to rise. Not drift, rise, straight up, as if being pulled. I repeated the experiment several times. Same result." Dr. O'Sullivan requested an explanation from the park. The response, dated December 20, 2007, stated, "Atmospheric conditions in temperate rainforests can produce unusual visual phenomena, particularly during temperature inversions and high humidity. What you observed is likely related to localized air density variations. Thank you for your interest in Olympic National Park." The response did not address the duration of the suspension. It did not explain the upward movement. It did not acknowledge that the phenomenon occurred in a specific, limited area. In January of 2011, a research team from the University of Washington visited the Ho rainforest to study microclimate variations. The team included 2 atmospheric scientists, Dr. Kevin Dumont and Dr. Nora Abimbola, and a field technician named Jessica Yamamoto. They brought handheld thermometers, humidity sensors, and a thermal imaging camera. On the morning of January 14, Conditions were ideal. Temperature 30 degrees Fahrenheit, no measurable wind, heavy fog. The team hiked to mile marker 1.3 and began testing. Dr. Dumont exhaled into the cold air. The vapor cloud appeared and hung motionless. Dr. Abimbola activated the thermal imaging camera and recorded. The footage, later reviewed in the lab, showed something unexpected. The suspended breath retained a thermal signature consistent with human body temperature, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, for the entire duration of its suspension. Normal exhaled breath cools rapidly upon contact with cold air, typically reaching ambient temperature within 2 to 3 seconds. This did not. Dr. Abimbola later wrote in her field notes, "The thermal data contradicts known thermodynamic principles. Vapor should equilibrate with ambient temperature almost immediately. What we recorded shows no heat loss over a 20-second period. The vapor remained at body temperature, then rose vertically while still warm. I have no explanation." The team conducted additional tests over 3 days. They measured air temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure at multiple points along the trail. They found no anomalies except in the 200-yard section where the breath phenomenon occurred. In that area, air temperature was consistent with surrounding sections. Humidity was high but not unusually so. Wind was negligible, yet breath behaved differently. Dr. Dumont submitted a preliminary report to the National Park Service in March of 2011. The report described the observations and thermal imaging data, concluding, "The observed phenomenon requires further study. The retention of thermal energy in exhaled vapor, combined with vertical movement contrary to expected convection patterns, suggests an environmental factor not currently understood." The Park Service acknowledged receipt of the report. No follow-up study was commissioned. Dr. Dumont attempted to publish the findings in the Journal of Atmospheric Science. The paper was rejected. The editor's response cited insufficient data to support extraordinary claims and lack of reproducible experimental controls. Dr. Dumont did not resubmit. In 2013, a wilderness guide named Gerald Kowalski, who led winter hiking tours in Olympic National Park, began warning his clients about the phenomenon. He described it as a cold spot and advised hikers to move through the area quickly. When asked why, he said, "It's not dangerous exactly, but it's not right. People get uncomfortable. They start asking questions I can't answer. It's easier to just keep moving." Kowalski also noted that some hikers reported feeling lightheaded or disoriented in the area. One client, a man named Marcus Petrov, described the experience in a post on a hiking forum. "My breath hung in the air like I was underwater. I felt dizzy, like I couldn't get enough oxygen, even though I was breathing fine. My friend didn't notice anything, but I had to sit down for a few minutes. When we moved past that section, I felt normal again." Several other forum users replied with similar accounts. The thread was archived but not widely shared. In 2016, Olympic National Park conducted an internal review of unusual visitor reports. The review, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2019, included 17 separate accounts of the breath phenomenon between 2003 and 2015. The review concluded, "Reports are consistent but lack verifiable evidence. Recommend continued monitoring. No public advisory necessary at this time." No monitoring plan was implemented. No further documentation was added to the file. A thermal imaging specialist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had read about the phenomenon online, visited the site in January of 2020. She brought professional-grade equipment and conducted a series of tests. Her findings matched those of the 2011 study. Exhaled breath retained body temperature for extended periods and rose vertically. Dr. Tanaka also noted something new. Using a high-speed camera, she recorded the breath at 500 frames per second. The footage showed that the vapor did not simply hang in the air, it pulsed, contracting and expanding slightly, as though responding to an unseen rhythm. The pulsing occurred at approximately 1.2 cycles per second. Dr. Tanaka submitted her findings to 3 journals. All rejected the paper. She posted the footage online. It received minimal attention. The phenomenon continues. Hikers still report it, particularly during clear, cold winter mornings. The Park Service has issued no warnings, no explanations, no restrictions on trail access. The 200-yard section remains open, unmarked, indistinguishable from the rest of the trail except for what happens when you exhale. And somewhere in a government archive, there is thermal footage showing human breath that refuses to cool, hanging in the air like a small ghost, pulsing gently before rising into the canopy and disappearing. Always in the same place, always on windless mornings, always defying the simple physics of cold air and warm breath, and no one has explained why. Some caves keep time more precisely than any clock. Ape Cave is the longest lava tube in the continental United States, stretching nearly 2.5 miles beneath the forested slopes of Mount St. Helens in southwestern Washington. Formed roughly 2,000 years ago during an eruption, the cave is a hollow tunnel where molten basalt once flowed, leaving behind a cylindrical passage with walls of smooth, dark rock. The temperature inside remains a constant 42 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. The cave is dark, absolutely dark, beyond the reach of headlamps and flashlights carried by visitors. It has been a popular destination since the 1950s, when local loggers explored it and gave it its name. Not because apes lived there, but after a Boy Scout troop whose members called themselves the St. Helens Apes. The U.S. Forest Service manages the cave as part of the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument. During summer months, thousands of visitors descend into the cave, walking along the lower passage or scrambling through the more challenging upper section. The cave is considered stable. Structural surveys conducted over decades have shown minimal deterioration. The basalt is dense and solid. Rockfalls are rare and typically occur only during seismic events or after significant freeze-thaw cycles. The cave does not change much. It is predictable, except for the rocks that fall at 213. The pattern was first documented in the summer of 1994 when the Forest Service installed seismic monitoring equipment in Ape Cave as part of a broader volcanic surveillance program following the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. The equipment, seismometers designed to detect ground movement and structural shifts, was placed at 3 locations within the cave: near the entrance, at the midpoint, and in the upper passage. The lead geologist overseeing the installation was Dr. Patricia Esquivel, a volcanologist with the United States Geological Survey. Her team calibrated the instruments and began continuous monitoring in June of 1994. The seismometers were sensitive enough to detect footsteps, dripping water, and the subtle settling of rock. Within the first week, the instruments recorded a consistent anomaly. Every day, at exactly 2:13 in the morning and again at 2:13 in the afternoon, the seismometers registered a brief impact, a sharp spike in the data consistent with a rock falling from the ceiling and striking the cave floor. The impacts occurred regardless of weather, regardless of visitor activity, regardless of seismic conditions elsewhere in the region. Dr. Esquivel assumed equipment malfunction. She recalibrated the seismometers. The pattern continued. She replaced the sensors. The pattern continued. In July of 1994, she and 2 field assistants, geologists named Marcus Odinica and Rebecca Yamamoto, entered the cave at 2 in the morning to observe the phenomenon directly. They positioned themselves at different points along the passage, each with a flashlight and a watch synchronized to atomic time. At 2:13 they heard it. a sharp crack followed by the sound of a rock striking the ground. Odinica, stationed in the lower passage approximately 200 yards from the entrance, found the rock. It was a piece of basalt, roughly the size of a golf ball, lying on the cave floor. The ceiling above showed a fresh scar where the rock had detached. The team returned that afternoon at 2 in the afternoon. At 2:13, another rock fell. This time, Yamamoto was nearby. She retrieved it and weighed it on a portable scale. The rock weighed 4.3 ounces. The morning rock, when weighed later, was 4.2 ounces. Dr. Esquivel documented the observations in her field report, submitted to the USGS in August of 1994. The report noted, seismic data indicates consistent, timed rockfall events within Ape Cave occurring at 02:13 and 14:13 daily. Visual confirmation obtained. Cause unknown. No correlation with seismic activity, temperature fluctuations, or human presence. Recommend continued monitoring. The monitoring continued. The pattern persisted. Over the following months, Dr. Esquivel's team collected dozens of the fallen rocks. Each was cataloged, weighed, and analyzed. The weights varied slightly, between 4 and 4.5 ounces, but remained remarkably consistent. The rocks came from different sections of the cave. Some fell near the entrance. Others fell deep in the upper passage. The locations were never the same twice. Structural engineers were consulted. A team from the University of Washington conducted a comprehensive survey of the cave in the spring of 1995 using ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, and manual inspection. They found no cracks, no unstable sections, no signs of imminent collapse. The cave was structurally sound, yet the rocks continued to fall, twice a day, at 2:13, every day. Dr. Esquivel expanded the study. She installed additional seismometers and acoustic sensors throughout the cave. She placed motion-activated cameras at key locations. The data confirmed what she already knew. At 2:13, a rock fell. The cameras occasionally captured the moment, a small fragment detaching from the ceiling and dropping to the floor. No visible cause, no tremor, no external force. The rock simply fell. In October of 1995, Dr. Esquivel submitted a follow-up report. She noted, the regularity of the rockfall events defies geological explanation. Basalt fracturing is typically caused by thermal expansion, seismic stress, or water infiltration, all of which are irregular and unpredictable. The observed pattern suggests a mechanism not currently understood. The timing precision, accurate to within seconds over 18 months, is unprecedented in natural rock mechanics. The USGS acknowledged the report but provided no additional funding or resources for further investigation. Dr. Esquivel was reassigned to a different project in Alaska in early 1996. She left the seismic equipment in place, still recording. The pattern continued. In 2002, a cave guide named Vincent Harlow, who led tours through Ape Cave during the summer season, began keeping a personal log of the rockfalls. Harlow had heard about the phenomenon from Forest Service staff and became curious. He started entering the cave at 2 in the afternoon, before the 2:13 fall, and waiting with a group of visitors to observe it. He described the experience in an interview years later. It became part of the tour. I'd tell people, if we're quiet, we'll hear something unusual. And at 2:13, like clockwork, you'd hear the crack and the impact. People thought I was staging it somehow, but I wasn't. It just happened, every single day. Harlow also noted that the fallen rocks were never hot, never showed signs of recent fracturing beyond the fresh breakpoint, and always seemed to come from sections of ceiling that looked identical to the surrounding rock. No visible weakness, no cracks, no discoloration. In 2009, a geophysicist named Dr. Amara Delgado visited Ape Cave as part of a research project on volcanic rock stability. She reviewed the historical seismic data and was struck by the consistency of the rockfall pattern. She contacted Dr. Esquivel, who had since retired, and requested access to the original field notes. Dr. Esquivel provided copies of her reports and raw data. Dr. Delgado analyzed 15 years of seismic records. The pattern had not changed. 213 twice a day, every day, for over a decade. She calculated the probability of such regularity occurring naturally. The odds were astronomical. Dr. Delgado attempted to publish her findings in the Journal of Geophysical Research. The paper was rejected. The editor's response stated, "While the data is intriguing, the lack of a plausible mechanism renders the conclusion speculative. We recommend resubmission with additional supporting evidence." Dr. Delgado did not resubmit. She later said, "I'm a scientist. I deal with data, not speculation. The data is clear. Rocks fall at 213. They've been falling at 213 since we started recording. I can't explain why. No one can. But the data doesn't lie." The Forest Service was asked about the phenomenon in 2012 during a public information session about cave safety. A spokesperson stated, "Ape Cave is a geologically active environment. Minor rockfalls are a normal part of lava tube evolution. Visitors are advised to wear helmets and remain alert." The statement did not address the timing. It did not mention the decades of documentation. It did not explain why the rockfalls occurred with such precision. In 2017, India, the seismic monitoring equipment in Ape Cave was removed as part of a budget reduction initiative. The Forest Service stated that the volcanic threat level at Mount St. Helens had decreased, and continuous monitoring of the cave was no longer necessary. But the rocks continued to fall. Cave guides still hear them. Visitors occasionally report the phenomenon on online forums. One hiker, writing in 2020, described hearing a rockfall at exactly 2:13 during an afternoon visit. She wrote, "I checked my phone. It was 2:13. The guide said it happens every day at that time. I asked why. He said nobody knows." The rocks are still falling, twice a day. At 2:13, always from different places, always weighing within 2 ounces of each other. And somewhere in a storage facility, there are boxes of basalt fragments collected over years, each one tagged with a date and time, each one proof of a pattern that no one has explained. A cave that keeps time, a mountain that marks the hours with falling stone, and no one knows why. Some structures exist in 2 states at once. Ross Lake National Recreation Area occupies the northern section of the North Cascades in Washington state, a landscape of steep-walled valleys and glacially carved peaks stretching to the Canadian border. The lake itself is a reservoir created in 1949 by the completion of Ross Dam, flooding a narrow canyon that once held the Skagit River. The surrounding wilderness is dense and remote, old-growth cedar, Douglas fir, and hemlock forest broken by alpine meadows and talus slopes. Access is limited. Most visitors arrive by boat or by hiking the East Bank Trail, a route that follows the eastern shore through terrain that has changed little since the dam was built. Scattered throughout the area are remnants of earlier habitation, Forest Service cabins, fire lookout foundations, and the decaying infrastructure of logging camps that operated in the early 20th century. Most of these structures have been abandoned for decades, left to collapse under the weight of snow and time. They are marked on old maps but rarely maintained. The Forest Service catalogs them as historical features but does not preserve them. They are allowed to return to the forest. One such cabin sits approximately 3 miles north of Ross Dam, accessible by a decommissioned trail that branches off the East Bank route. The cabin does not appear on current maps. It is not listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Forest Service records identify it only as Structure R7, built in the 1950s as a seasonal patrol station. It was decommissioned in the 1970s. According to those same records, It was demolished in 1979, but the cabin is still there, or it was, or it is, depending on how you approach it. The anomaly was first documented in June of 2004 by a photographer named Dr. Miriam Kowalski, who was working on a project documenting abandoned Forest Service infrastructure in the North Cascades. Dr. Kowalski hiked to the cabin from the south, following the remnants of the old trail. She arrived in early afternoon and found the structure in surprisingly good condition. Walls intact, roof solid, windows unbroken. The door hung slightly ajar, but the cabin appeared weathered rather than ruined. She photographed it extensively, noting in her field journal, "Structure R7, exterior in fair condition, windows intact, minimal vegetation encroachment, evidence of recent animal activity but no human use." Dr. Kowalski left the site and continued north along the trail, planning to loop back and return to the trailhead from a different direction. She reached a viewpoint approximately half a mile north of the cabin and decided to photograph it from a distance. Through her telephoto lens, the cabin looked different. The roof had collapsed. The walls were partially fallen. Vegetation had overgrown the structure almost entirely. She assumed she was looking at a different building. She checked her GPS. The coordinates matched. She hiked back to the cabin, approaching now from the north. As she got closer, the structure came into view exactly as she had seen it through the lens, collapsed, overgrown, abandoned for decades. She compared her photographs. The images taken from the south showed an intact cabin. The images taken from the north, minutes later, showed a ruin. Dr. Kowalski documented the discrepancy in her journal and submitted a report to the Forest Service, requesting clarification on the cabin's status and condition. The response, dated July 15, 2004, stated, "Structure R7 was demolished in 1979. No standing structure exists at the listed coordinates. Photographic evidence suggests misidentification of location or structure." Dr. Kowalski knew her coordinates were correct. She knew she had photographed the same cabin. She returned to the site in August of 2004, this time with a colleague, a surveyor named Vincent Harlow. They approached from the south. The cabin was intact. They walked around to the north side. The cabin was ruined. Harlow later described the experience in a written statement. "We were standing in the same clearing, looking at the same foundation. But the building itself changed depending on where we stood. From the south, it was solid. From the north, it was collapsed. We walked back and forth several times. The transition happened somewhere in the middle. There was a point where the structure seemed to flicker between states. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't gradual. It was like crossing a threshold." Dr. Kowalski and Harlow took measurements, photographs, and GPS readings. They documented the foundation dimensions, which were consistent regardless of viewing angle. But the structure itself, the walls, the roof, the windows, appeared differently depending on the direction of approach. They submitted a joint report to the Forest Service. The response, dated September 3, 2004, repeated the previous statement. The cabin had been demolished in 1979. No further comment was provided. In 2006, a hiking group from Seattle visited the area and reported the same phenomenon on an online forum. One member, a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, posted, "We approached the old ranger cabin from the trail and it looked abandoned but standing. When we left and looked back from higher up the trail, it looked completely collapsed. We joked about it being a trick of the light, but when we reviewed our photos later, the difference was obvious. Same cabin, two completely different conditions." Several other hikers replied to the post, confirming similar experiences. One wrote, "I've been to that cabin 3 times. Every time it looks different depending on which way you're walking. I thought I was losing my mind until I saw this thread. In 2009, Samind, Property records researcher named Marcus Odinica, working on a thesis about Forest Service land management, requested documentation related to Structure R7. He received 83 pages of material, heavily redacted. The documents included a demolition order dated March 1979 and a construction report dated June 1982. The demolition order stated, "Structure R7 to be removed due to structural instability and lack of operational necessity. Demolition scheduled for completion by end of fiscal year." The construction report, written by a supervisor named Gerald Vasquez, stated, "Reconstruction of Patrol Cabin R7 completed June 1982. Structure built to standard specifications, materials sourced from Regional Depot. Cabin operational for seasonal use." Odinaka noted the discrepancy and requested clarification. Why had the cabin been rebuilt 3 years after demolition? Who authorized the reconstruction? Where were the construction permits? The Forest Service response, dated November 20, 2009, stated, "Records from the period in question are incomplete due to administrative transitions and archive consolidation. No construction permits for Structure R7 are available. The structure is currently classified as non-operational and is not maintained." The response did not explain the reconstruction. It did not address the demolition and rebuild timeline. It did not acknowledge the impossibility of a cabin being demolished and then reconstructed without permits or authorization. Odinica visited the site in person in July of 2010. He approached from the south and found the cabin intact. He approached from the north and found it collapsed. He documented both states with photographs and video. He measured the foundation, which remained consistent. He examined the walls from the south-facing side, solid wood, weathered but sound. He walked to the north side. The walls were gone, reduced to rotting timbers half buried in moss. He submitted his findings as an appendix to his thesis. His thesis committee accepted the work but noted in their review, "The photographic evidence is compelling but lacks scientific explanation. Further investigation is recommended." No further investigation was conducted. In 2015, the Forest Service updated its digital mapping system. Structure R7 was removed from all maps. The coordinates were noted as historical site, no standing structures. When questioned, a spokesperson stated, "Obsolete infrastructure is periodically removed from mapping databases to reduce clutter and avoid misdirecting visitors to unsafe or non-existent locations." But the cabin remains. Hikers still find it. Photographs still surface online, showing both versions, intact and collapsed, solid and ruined. Some photographers have captured both states in the same visit, sometimes within minutes of each other, in a 2019, a wilderness guide named Rebecca O'Sullivan led a group to the site. She described the experience in a blog post. "I've been guiding in the North Cascades for 10 years. I've seen weird things, weather patterns, animal behavior, terrain that doesn't match the maps. But the cabin near Ross Lake is the only thing I've encountered that I can't rationalize. It's there, and it's not there, depending on where you stand. My clients thought I was playing a trick on them. I wasn't. I don't know what it is. I just know it's real." The cabin sits in the forest, existing in 2 states, separated by nothing more than the direction from which you approach. From the south it stands, weathered but whole, windows reflecting the filtered light of the canopy. From the north it has collapsed, consumed by decades of decay. And somewhere in a filing cabinet there are records of a demolition that may or may not have happened, and a reconstruction that should not exist. The forest does not explain. The cabin does not choose. And those who visit must decide which version they believe, knowing that both are real and neither makes sense. There are trees whose shadows give light instead of taking it away. Cathedral Grove is located on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, approximately 100 miles north of Victoria and easily accessible from Highway 4. The Grove is part of McMillan Provincial Park, a 200-acre preserve protecting some of the last remaining old-growth forest on the island. The trees here are ancient, Douglas firs and western red cedars that were already centuries old when European settlers first arrived. Some exceed 9 feet in diameter and rise over 250 feet. The forest floor is carpeted with ferns and moss, and the canopy filters sunlight into soft, dappled patterns. It is a place of pilgrimage for naturalists, photographers, and tourists seeking a glimpse of what the coastal rainforests once looked like before industrial logging. Though Cathedral Grove is technically in British Columbia, it sits less than 30 miles from the Washington state border and is frequently visited by residents of the Pacific Northwest. For decades, it has been a landmark, a preserved fragment of ecological history. The park sees hundreds of thousands of visitors each year, most of whom walk the short loop trail that winds through the largest trees. Signs identify notable specimens by species and approximate age. The park is well documented, well photographed, and well loved. But one tree behaves in a way that should not be possible. The tree in question is a western red cedar, cataloged by Park Services as specimen C47, located approximately 200 yards from the parking area along the main trail. It is large but not the largest, roughly 7 feet in diameter, estimated age between 600 and 800 years. Visually, it is indistinguishable from the other cedars in the grove. The bark is deeply furrowed, reddish-brown, and covered in patches of moss. The crown spreads wide and the branches droop gracefully. There is nothing about the tree that appears unusual, except its shadow. The anomaly was first noted in the summer of 1964 by a photographer named Gerald Kowalski, who was documenting the grove for a regional tourism campaign. Kowalski was using black and white film and noticed during development that several of his images showed an unusual exposure pattern. In photographs of specimen C47, the shadow cast by the tree appeared lighter than the surrounding sunlit ground. He assumed it was a processing error and discarded the negatives. But other photographers began reporting the same phenomenon. By the 1970s, visitors occasionally mentioned the bright shadow in their journals and letters to the Park Service. Most attributed it to optical illusions or reflections from the glossy leaves of salal bushes growing nearby. The Park Service received no formal complaints and took no action. In 1991, a botanist named Dr. Nora Abimbola visited Cathedral Grove to collect core, samples from several old-growth trees as part of a climate research project. Her work involved extracting thin cylindrical samples from tree trunks using an increment borer, then analyzing the growth rings to reconstruct historical temperature and precipitation patterns. She sampled specimen C47 on August 12, 1991. The core sample revealed something unexpected. The tree's growth rings showed consistent annual increments from the inner core outward, representing centuries of steady growth. But at a depth corresponding to the year 1962, the rings abruptly stopped. There was no growth ring for 1962. The following ring, representing 1963, resumed as though nothing had happened. No scar tissue, no evidence of disease or trauma. The tree had simply stopped growing for 1 year, then continued. Dr. Abimbola documented the finding, but considered it an anomaly, perhaps a statistical artifact or an error in her ring count methodology. She did not pursue it further. The shadow phenomenon gained wider attention in 2006 when a physics teacher named Marcus Delgado visited the grove with a handheld photometer, a device that measures light intensity. Delgado had heard about the bright shadow from a friend and was curious whether it was measurable. On a clear afternoon in July, he took readings in various locations around specimen C47. The results were unambiguous. In direct sunlight, the photometer registered 110,000 lux. In the shadow of the tree, the photometer registered 126,000 lux, 15% brighter than the surrounding sunlight. Delgado repeated the measurements at different times of day and in different weather conditions. The results were consistent. The shadow was brighter than the light. He posted his findings on a science education forum. The thread received skeptical responses. Most assumed equipment malfunction or user error. One commenter suggested that reflections from the tree bark or surrounding vegetation could create localized brightness, though this would not explain why the effect was confined to the shadow. Delgado returned to the grove in 2007 with a colleague, a physicist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka. They brought professional-grade light meters and conducted a more rigorous survey. The measurements confirmed Delgado's findings. The shadow cast by specimen C47 was consistently and measurably brighter than the sunlight around it. Dr. Tanaka later wrote in a blog post, "I've studied optics for 20 years. I understand reflection, refraction, diffraction, and interference. None of those phenomena explain what we measured." A shadow, by definition, is an area where light is blocked. It should be darker, not brighter. What we observed defies basic physics. Dr. Tanaka submitted a brief report to the Journal of Applied Optics. The report was rejected without review. The editor's response stated, "The described phenomenon is inconsistent with established optical principles and requires extraordinary evidence. We recommend replication by independent researchers." No independent researchers pursued the matter. In 2012, a park ranger named Vincent Harlow, who had worked at Cathedral Grove for 15 years, was interviewed by a local journalist writing a feature on the park. Harlow mentioned the bright shadow casually, describing it as one of those things everyone who works here knows about, but nobody talks about. When pressed, Harlow said, "Tourists notice it all the time. They take photos and come back later confused because the shadow looks wrong. We tell them it's the moss or the way the light filters through the canopy. Most people accept that. But honestly, I've stood under that tree 100 times. The shadow is bright, not reflective, not shimmering, just bright, like there's a light source inside it. I don't know what causes it. Nobody does." The journalist did not include the comments in the published article. In 2015, a dendrochronologist named Dr. Patricia Esquivel obtained permission to take a second core sample from specimen C47. She wanted to verify Dr. Abimbola's findings from 1991. The new sample confirmed the original observation. The tree had no growth ring for 1962. It had stopped growing for exactly 1 year, then resumed. Dr. Esquivel also conducted carbon dating on samples from rings immediately before and after the gap. The dating confirmed the chronology. The tree had been alive and healthy, then stopped growing for 12 months, then resumed without any biological indication of stress. She cross-referenced the dates with historical climate data, searching for an environmental event that might explain the pause. She found nothing. 1962 was an unremarkable year climatically. No droughts, no extreme cold, no volcanic activity. Dr. Esquivel submitted her findings to the Canadian Journal of Forest Research. The paper was accepted but generated no follow-up studies. In 2018, a photographer named Rebecca O'Sullivan compiled a collection of images of specimen C47 taken by visitors over 5 decades. She obtained photos from park archives, personal collections, and online repositories. The earliest clear image showing the bright shadow effect was dated July 1964, 2 years after the tree stopped growing. O'Sullivan noted the correlation in a self-published photo essay, but offered no explanation. She wrote, "The shadow appeared after the tree stopped growing. Whether the two are connected, I can't say, but the timing is difficult to ignore." The British Columbia Park Service was contacted in 2020 regarding the phenomenon. A spokesperson provided a written statement. Cathedral Grove is home to many unique and ancient trees, each with its own ecological and historical significance. Variations in light, shadow, and perception are common in old-growth forests due to complex canopy structures and environmental factors. We encourage visitors to enjoy the natural beauty of the park and to respect the fragile ecosystem. The statement did not address the photometric measurements. It did not mention the missing growth ring. It did not acknowledge the decades of documentation. The tree still stands. Visitors still walk past it, most unaware of anything unusual. But those who stop, who wait for the right angle of sunlight, who look closely at the ground beneath the branches, they see it. A shadow that glows softly, brighter than the day around it, defying every principle of light and darkness. And if you stand inside that shadow, some say, the world feels quieter, not silent, just hushed, as though the forest is holding its breath, waiting for something that has not yet arrived. The tree stopped growing in 1962. The shadow began glowing in 1964, and no one has explained why. Some stones speak in voices that microphones cannot hear. Mount Baker rises 10,781 feet above sea level in the North Cascades of Washington State, a glaciated volcano visible from both Seattle and Vancouver. The mountain is the second most thermally active volcano in the Cascade Range, with fumaroles and steam vents near the summit that have remained active since recorded observations began in the 1800s. The surrounding wilderness, part of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, is characterized by steep terrain, dense subalpine forest, and alpine meadows that transition into permanent snowfields above 6,000 feet. The area sees heavy mountaineering traffic during summer months, with climbers ascending via the Coleman-Deming and Easton Glacier routes. At approximately 7,200 feet elevation, along a ridge extending northeast from the mountain's main massif, there is a flat saddle where climbers sometimes camp before summit attempts. The location offers partial protection from prevailing winds and provides access to water from seasonal snowmelt. It is unmarked on most maps but known informally among climbers as Heather Ridge, named for the low vegetation that grows there during brief summer months. Until 2017, the ridge was also home to 7 granite boulders arranged in a geometrically perfect heptagon, each stone roughly 4 feet tall and spaced approximately 12 feet apart. The stones were not native to the immediate area. Geological surveys identified them as glacial erratics deposited during the last ice age. Their arrangement, however, was too precise to be natural. The stones first appeared in mountaineering reports in the early 1980s. Most climbers noted them only in passing, unusual, perhaps deliberately placed, but not remarkable enough to warrant investigation. No one knew who had arranged them or why. Indigenous peoples of the region, the Nooksack and Lummi nations, had no recorded traditions associated with the site. The Forest Service had no documentation of the stone's origin, but in certain conditions, the stones produced sound. The phenomenon was first documented in July of 1997 by a climbing party consisting of 4 alpinists: Dr. Patricia Esquivel, a geologist from Oregon; Marcus Delgado, a wilderness guide from Bellingham; and 2 clients, Rebecca Yamamoto and Vincent Harlow. The group had established camp on Heather Ridge the evening before a planned summit attempt. Weather conditions were deteriorating, winds were increasing, and clouds were moving in from the west. At approximately 9:30 in the evening, as wind speeds exceeded 30 miles per hour, the stones began to hum. Dr. Esquivel described it in her trip report. The sound was low frequency, harmonic, and seemed to resonate from all 7 stones simultaneously. It was not wind passing over or through the stones. The tone was too pure, too musical. It lasted approximately 3 minutes, then stopped abruptly when the wind shifted direction. The group discussed the phenomenon but attributed it to natural acoustic effects, wind interacting with the stone's shape and arrangement in a way that produced audible resonance. They noted it in their journals and continued with their climb. But Harlow, one of the clients, later reported something else. In a statement given to a journalist in 2003, he said, "The sound wasn't just a hum. While it was happening, I started remembering things, conversations, specific conversations. But they weren't real memories. I knew that even as I was experiencing them. They were in my voice, but I was talking to someone I didn't recognize, warning them about a place I'd never been. The details were vivid. I could hear my own words. Don't go to the lake when the wind stops. I don't know what lake. I've never said those words, but I remember saying them." Harlow did not mention this experience to his climbing partners at the time. He assumed it was altitude-induced hypoxia or fatigue, but years later, after reading about others who had experienced the stones, he came forward. Over the following 2 decades, similar reports accumulated. Climbers camping on Heather Ridge during windy conditions reported hearing the hum. Many also described experiencing false memories, conversations they had never had, in their own voices, always containing warnings about unfamiliar places. A climber named Dr. Amara Okafor, who visited the site in August of 2009, documented her experience in a blog post. The stones hummed for about 5 minutes while the wind was strong. During that time, I had a clear memory of telling someone, a woman I didn't recognize, not to enter a forest after dark. I could hear my own voice, calm and serious, saying, "The trees don't move right when there's no moon." I've never been to the place I was describing. I've never had that conversation. But the memory felt real, more real than actual memories. In 2011, a sound engineer named Gerald Kowalski visited Heather Ridge with professional recording equipment. He had read about the humming stones online and was curious whether the sound could be captured and analyzed. He arrived during favorable conditions, clear skies, steady winds exceeding 35 miles per hour. The stones hummed. Kowalski heard it clearly. He placed multiple microphones around the heptagon, recording from different angles and distances. When he reviewed the recordings later, they contained only wind noise. The hum was absent. Kowalski returned in 2012 with more sensitive equipment, including low-frequency microphones designed to capture infrasound below the range of human hearing. Again, the stones hummed. Again, the recordings captured nothing. He wrote in his field notes, "The sound is audible to the human ear, but not to recording devices. This suggests either a neurological phenomenon, something affecting perception rather than producing actual sound waves, or an acoustic effect so localized and directional that microphones cannot capture it. I have no explanation." Kowalski also experienced the false memories. He later described them as intrusive but not frightening, like remembering a dream that feels more coherent than it should. In 2014, the Forest Service received a formal inquiry from a mountaineering organization requesting information about the stone's origin and any associated safety concerns. The inquiry was prompted by multiple climbers reporting disorientation and auditory disturbances at the site. The Forest Service conducted a site assessment in September of 2014. A team of 3 rangers visited Heather Ridge, inspected the stones, and filed a report. The report, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2019, noted 7 large granite boulders arranged in circular pattern. Origin unknown. No immediate safety hazard identified. Recommend further evaluation if additional reports are received. No further evaluation was conducted. But in 2016, the Forest Service received a second inquiry, this time from a neurologist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had become interested in the phenomenon after hearing about it from a patient, a climber who had visited the site and reported experiencing persistent intrusive memories for weeks afterward. Dr. Tanaka requested permission to conduct a controlled study at the site, bringing participants and monitoring their neurological responses to the stone's hum. The request was denied. The Forest Service response, dated March 11, 2016, stated, "The proposed study site is in a remote, high-altitude wilderness area where safety and logistical concerns preclude organized research activities. We recommend alternative research locations." Dr. Tanaka did not pursue the matter further. In June of 2017, the stones were removed. No public announcement was made. No explanation was provided. Climbers who visited Heather Ridge that summer found the site empty, a circular depression in the ground where the stones had been, and nothing more. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2018 sought documentation related to the removal. The Forest Service provided 14 pages, heavily redacted. The only legible information indicated that the stones had been relocated for resource management purposes, and that the operation had been carried out by a contracted crew in early June. The destination of the stones was not disclosed. The contractor was not named. The reason for removal was not explained. But the humming did not stop. Climbers who visited Heather Ridge after the removal began reporting the same phenomenon. On windy evenings, they heard the hum, low, harmonic, resonating from the empty ground where the stones had been. Some still experienced the false memories, the warnings in their own voices about places they had never seen. A climber named Kevin O'Sullivan posted on a mountaineering forum in August of 2018. "The stones are gone, but the sound is still there. I heard it last night, clear as anything. My tent was pitched right where the center of the circle used to be. The wind was strong, and the hum started around 10 p.m. I remembered warning someone about a cave. Don't go in when the air smells like metal. I don't know what it means. I've never been in a cave like that." The Forest Service was contacted again in 2019, asking whether the phenomenon had been documented after the stone's removal. A spokesperson stated, "We have no reports of unusual conditions at the referenced location. Climbers are reminded to be aware of altitude-related perceptual effects and to descend if experiencing disorientation." The humming continues. Climbers still report it. Online forums contain dozens of accounts, all describing the same experience, a harmonic tone that microphones cannot capture, and memories of conversations that never happened, always warnings, always in the listener's own voice. And somewhere, in a location that was never disclosed, 7 granite stones sit in storage, or have been relocated, removed from a ridge where they hummed in the wind and made people remember things they never experienced. But the ground remembers, and the wind still carries the sound. And those who camp there still hear their own voices, speaking words they never said, warning of places they will never find.